right. I'm joined by Rob Larson, economics professor, House economist for Current Affairs magazine, and frequent debate breakdowner. How you doing, Rob?
I'm good, man. I'm very excited. These are the some of the biggest. This is one of the big possible events. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, we talked about doing this one a little while ago, so I'm glad we're actually doing it now. Should be a nice little palate cleanser because we're probably going to do several. Like coming up, of course, the Christopher Hitchens book is about to come out on New Year's, so we will probably be doing a bunch of his debates soon, and which are always fun, but it's good to mix it up a little bit, so get some non-Hitch content in here, and this is one I remember was suggested a good while back, I think. I don't remember who, but somebody I think on the Patreon suggested that it was one that we could do. So should be good. Just getting this. Here we go. Let's get the actual link. No. That's right. Okay, I remember where this is. But yes, you were saying, Rob?
Oh, I'm just excited about this one. I admit, like this is a considered a really important intellectual encounter in the Cold War era. But I have to admit, I've never watched this thing all the way through. I've seen countless elongated clips over time, but I've never watched this one all the way through. And I've watched the Foucault one all the way through, so it makes no sense. But this will be, as I recall, this is on Firing Line, right? This is on Buckley's show. Like the pieces of this I remember are the famous bits where he's holding a little 60s era little button and he can signal the producer when to go to a commercial break, which is a great upper hand to have. So the first lesson of this debate is control the debate unethically so that you can determine what points get made. That's the first lesson right there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I will say, we may have talked about this before. It has occurred to me many times that as much of a insane, Fonda Franco kind of level, arch conservative as William F. Buckley was, the thing I find a little bit about funny about Firing Line is that it's hard to imagine it existed anywhere but public television.
That's true. Like there is a paced, considered rhythm to this show that's much more public broadcasting than the modern commercial environment. Not to talk up PBS, which every time I watch I find myself grinding my teeth. But it's true. It is a different kind of program than you would have today. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, look, it's PBS is very imperfect. I think there are lots of things to grind your teeth about, but but it's also just like that relative freedom from the sort of imperative of sweating about advertisers for every single minute that you can get from public broadcasting allows you to have a program like this. I mean, it could exist now because it'd be on YouTube. But I don't think it could have existed on commercial television.
Yeah, this doesn't scream commercial use, but because it skews to the right, and this obviously is the Cold War kind of New Deal dominated era. So let the right wing guy have his own show. Let him, nice long uninterrupted segments. That'll be nice. But I am looking forward to this. This will be, Chomsky, everyone associates with intellectual integrity and very much political consistency over the years. So that'll be nice. And through the Hoover Institute, as long as someone's got it up. If we have to use their servers, I accept that. But I'm excited. I'm very excited. I don't have a huge amount piled up, except to say one programming note. Because of Joe Biden's economy and COVID supply chain disruptions, which are his fault because he caused them before becoming president. Pretty smart.
Yep.
I couldn't get any Ardbeg to drink, so I'm reduced to drinking Lefroy. It's a sad night, but
I think it'd be okay.
I'll scrape by on that.
Yeah, I do have. Yeah, I do have some Talisker I'll probably bust out in a few minutes. Got to actually gonna probably finish dinner while we're watching the first part of it, just to give people a little glimpse behind the veil here. But Talisker after that, So that sounds really good actually. Yep. So the whole thing, 52 minutes for the full video I see here should be about perfect for a Thursday night debate breakdown. I guess what to say about this? I guess three things. So one, I will say, did you and I watch the Buckley Harrington? Am I remember that right?
We watched the the Buckley Vidal movie and another Buckley debate with Harrington, Michael Harrington.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
That was fun.
So it was fun. I try to force myself to get down at least a couple of conservative books a year just to kind of like keep myself honest, know what they're saying, but it's sometimes a much more unpleasant task, than other ones. And in 2019, I read The Right Side of History, How Reason and Moral Purpose Made the West Great by Ben Shapiro. And then the next conservative book I read after that was Buckley's book, God and Man at Yale. And I will tell you, after reading a couple hundred pages of Ben Shapiro's prose, I kind of had a moment of loving William F. Buckley because it's an insane McCarthyite tract, but it's so much better written than anything that Ben Shapiro, has ever been to.
Like it really, I mean, a lot of people had made this point, but I have to say, because you and I come from that segment of the left that reads a lot of right-wing crap and tries to bring it out, You've used that ton in your writing. I wrote a book-length rebuttal of Milton Friedman. Matt McManus, Nathan Robinson, like the people who suck up this dreadful garbage and comment on it. Are we heroes? Yes, we are. Okay, like we could just throw that out, obviously. But I gotta say, like that is, it is a draining thing. But people have said this. There is nothing like putting today's right-wing people who are billed as intellectuals too, not just some YouTube account. God bless Destiny, but like people, we're focused on as being, recognized intellectuals, and comparing them to what we had just in the sleazy early Cold War. It's a stunning thing. And at the same time, we've watched the right completely march to victory, maybe up to and including a Roe overturn, it looks like now, maybe. So maybe it goes to show, like, as you achieve, watch out social movements. As you achieve success, don't become stupider, because that can happen, apparently.
No, I think so. I mean, I think that because that is surely at least part of the story there of like what happened to these guys. Not that there aren't like evil but smart conservatives in the world today. They certainly exist, but nobody really at the level of prominence of like a William F. Buckley, right? The people who are at that level are not that, right? So
it's striking.
And I think that I think at least part of what's going on there is exactly that thing that there's sort of like, you get soft if you win too much, that like,
I always thought that was stupid, but I mean, you read a couple hundred pages, you go, well, maybe.
Yeah, right. That like, I mean, if nothing else, Buckley, was like fighting with people like Michael Harrington and Noam Chomsky. And that's not what your Ben Shapiro's, cut their teeth doing, to put it mildly. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have, and then of course, this is, talking about Vietnam, which I think is really, which is the point where Chomsky, who had, radical left views from very early, in his life, he was, he was a, like socialist Zionist youth activist in the 40s who was consistent enough to, be repulsed, by what he saw when he actually went to Israel in the 50s. But, Vietnam is like really where Chomsky decides that he has to stop. Like he can't live with himself if he's just going to like rest on his laurels as being the world's greatest linguist. And he has to like actually become politically involved in a way that he hadn't been before. And he starts doing what he's pretty much never stopped doing since then, and being really outspoken about American aggression around the world, and often when it was very lonely, right? I mean, like if you think about the period right after 9/11, when like not a lot of people saying like what somebody like Chomsky was saying, but man, if anything's ever been vindicated by history, right? I mean, that's got to be that.
Yeah, that's a great example, man. Because back then, when the 20th anniversary of 9/11 happened a couple months ago, like a lot of people were, kind of remembering like what an airless era that was, and just stifling, not wall-to-wall reactionary, troop worshipping, treacly bullshit. But like even then, Chomsky had those little thin books that came out right after the disaster, like that some cool ass publishers at 7 Stories and stuff rushed out. And at the time, like I just remember thinking, like, wow, this. Because by then I was old enough to be like a Z magazine reader and thinking about writing someday and stuff like that. I had written, locally and stuff. Thinking like, wow, this is, if I follow these footsteps, like this is like a lonely ass path. 20 years later, everyone's like, well, of course, Iraq was one of the great disasters ever. And it's just that long run consistency.
No,
like no one could look better than that, like with intellectually.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was just thinking about that earlier today, like how I swell with patriotic pride every time I think about that 20 years that the United States spent in Afghanistan, killing all those people and spending all of that money and creating all of that misery for the sake of the 20-year transition from the Taliban to the Taliban. I just can't tell you how good that makes me feel.
Much better than healthcare would. That we can agree on.
Yeah, no, if they'd spent those trillions of dollars on giving everybody healthcare, I mean, that would have been such a waste.
Wow, thank God we avoided that.
Yeah, exactly. Something you said earlier reminded me of this, by the way. You probably know this story, but just for anybody who doesn't, because it's always made me laugh. You can find on YouTube both Gore Fidel and Christopher Hitchens telling the story about Noam Chomsky, that he went to, allegedly, right, if this is an apocryphal, right, Chomsky, I don't know, sometime in like the 80s maybe, he went to the dentist, and the dentist said, like, he had this like damage in his teeth that like it seems like he was grinding his teeth all the time, and and he was asking Chomsky, like, do you do that? I was like, I don't know, not that I'm aware of. He asked his, wife, and, she goes, no. And he asked her, does he grind his teeth in his sleep? His wife says no. And, doctor's like, okay, well, both of you, like, be on the lookout for it. See if you can figure it out. And, and then she finally figures out that it's at a time that she's normally not in the room, because Chomsky is grinding his teeth every morning while he read the New York Times.
That's great. Yeah, I remember that from the. I remember Alex Coburn telling that story in an introduction to some Chomsky book somewhere. Like that story, it comes from enough sources. It must be true, man. It can't be apocryphal when 3 people vaguely remember it. That's great. That's fantastic. Yeah, I think most of us are content to read the New York Times and slowly, sadly exhale. That's how I. The Times, sure. But not, Chomsky feels it more. He carries it more, I guess. And just a sweet guy. I can't. P.S. for viewers may not realize this: Noam Chomsky's still alive. People may not. I think.
Yeah.
93, I think.
Yeah, I will say, just within like the last year or two, like, because it felt like Chomsky was just ageless. I remember like seeing him. I remember seeing him speak in like 2004, maybe. And
he's still the same look then.
I will say, just in the last year or two, he has visibly aged. I mean, like he's sort of gone from like a certain kind of like spry gray-haired look that he had for a very long time to like, the last year or two. I mean, now he just, I mean, whatever. I mean, I guess it makes him look even more venerable, but like Chomsky now kind of looks like this like wizened old like wizard who's just like stumbled back to his village from some, dungeon, where he'd been kept prisoner somewhere. But it's I mean, it's objectively, and he speaks much more slowly now and all of that. But it's objectively amazing that he's still doing what he's doing now.
It's true. Yeah, if you read him on the page, it's like nothing has changed, which I guess is what really matters, especially after, having recently enjoyed your exciting upcoming book on Mr. Hitchens there. It made me think again about what it's like when people change and you kind of fundamentally didn't realize, or people change in a very fundamental way and you realize, what didn't I, see in them, or how can this take place? Chomsky, intellectually and obviously politically, hyper consistent. And yes, he definitely does have more of the, he's in his super old age now. Like it's about time he embraced being more of a crazy old coot, in my opinion. And I say this as, he's like my intellectual godfather, and I very much like good, crazy prospector look. Let's see it. Come on. But yeah, he speaks more slowly, but it's other than that, like it's incredible.
No,
his brain doesn't have a hilarious.
Exactly. Yes, his brain is working just as well as ever. Sometimes I'll see people on Twitter or whatever who will like discover some Chomsky take that they don't like and be like, oh, Chomsky's lost, whatever. And it's like, invariably, if you actually look into it, it's like, yeah, he said the same thing in 1985, right? I mean, like he's Noam Chomsky. He doesn't, like he figured this shit out a long time ago, and and he thinks what he thinks. I think he's wrong about the Marx Bakunin debate, but that's a short list of subjects I differ from his takes on.
Yeah, that's getting like deep into the subsections.
Yeah. Exactly. Like you kind of have to because for the most part of it, it's not like, I remember Tariq Lee pointed this out in his book in 2004, Bush and Babylon, that 2004, 2005, one of those, that's like, no, like Noam Chomsky isn't as popular as he is around the world because he's like giving the left, like, or like liberation movements elsewhere in the world tactical or strategic advice. I mean, for the most part, he's not. It's just because he's like, he says true things about how American power works around the world in a very clear and compelling way, right? I mean, that's why he's popular in these countries. But in any case, let's get to it. We should start up the debate.
Yeah, and folks, remember to send requests for permission to the Hoover Institution, just for any purpose, just for any permission you need. Just do that.
Yeah.
Professor Noam Chomsky is listed in anybody's catalog as among the half dozen top heroes of the New Left. This standing he achieved by adopting over the past 2 or 3 years a series of adamant positions projecting at least American foreign policy, at most America itself. His essays and speeches are collected in his new book, American Power and the New Mandarins. Usually, Mr. Chomsky writes non-political books, for instance, Syntactic Structures in 1957, Cartesian Linguistics in 1966, and Topics in the Theory of Generative Grammar, 1965. He is a highly esteemed student of modern language and linguistics who teaches nowadays at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and has taught before at Berkeley, Columbia, and other strife-torn universities. He is a member of many organizations and learned societies, including, I'm sure he would want me to mention, the Aristotelian Society of Great Britain. In one of his essays, Mr. Chomsky writes, quote, by accepting the presumption of legitimacy of debate on certain issues such as this one, one has already lost one's humanity. I should like to begin by asking him why, under the circumstances, if by being here he stands to lose his humanity, he consented to appear in the first place.
Because, first of all, I didn't quite put it in those terms, I don't think. I think that
Quote,
by,
unquote.
yeah, but I think that I said that there are certain issues, for example, Auschwitz, such that by consenting to discuss them, one degrades oneself and to some degree loses one's humanity, and I think that that's true. Nevertheless, I can easily imagine circumstances in which I would have been glad to debate Auschwitz. For example, if there were some chance that by debating Auschwitz, it might have been possible to eliminate it or to at least mitigate the horror of what was going on. And I feel the same way about Vietnam. And I really think that fundamentally, there is no argument anymore at an intellectual level, in my opinion. But I think it's very important to discuss it nevertheless.
At what level is there an argument?
Well, there is a policy which I think is a destructive and devastating policy. It's continuing, and the continuation of the policy is, to some extent, based on the fact of public apathy or public acceptance. Hence, there still is the necessity to convince people that they should act strongly to put an end to this policy.
At what point was there an intellectual argument? At which point did an intellectual argument in favor of our intervening in Vietnam cease to exist?
Well, as I say there, I think that there may have been a time when there was something to debate. For example, I think that in the middle 50s, though I was opposed to the policy, and I think that it was right to be opposed to it, nevertheless, I think it was a debatable issue in a sense in which it is no longer a debatable issue.
Why is that?
Because at the moment, I think it's really an issue of the survival of the existence of Vietnam as an entity, as a social and cultural entity. I think that's what's at stake.
But even that could be intellectually argued, couldn't it?
Well, in the same sense in which Auschwitz could be intellectually argued.
No, I mean in a different sense.
No, I think in the same sense. In fact, don't forget there were people who argued in favor of Auschwitz and gave...
No, I haven't gotten that at all. I hadn't had any such on this program, nor do I intend to. But it seems to me that even if what you said were correct, there could be a perfectly legitimate argument over, for instance, the continuation of the state of Anguilla, or the continuation of the state of Biafra, or the continuation of the state of Goa.
I didn't talk about the existence of the state. I talked about the existence of the society as a social and cultural entity. I think that's what's at stake.
Oh, okay. Well, what if it's at stake? Mightn't there be 2 points of view about how to help it evolve into its natural forms, right?
Oh, there are many different points of view. I think they're very legitimate.
Well, now how can you say
they're very legitimate? They're very legitimate issues that can be argued as to how the United States ought to most efficaciously put an end to its destructive actions in Vietnam. There are many different alternatives that might be thought about.
Yes, but one way, of course, to put an end to America's necessary intervention is to conclude the war successfully. That's a way.
Yeah,
right?
one possible way is by destroying Vietnam, which I think is probably the most likely outcome.
Yeah. Well, now, for instance, one way in which we put an end to the Nazi occupation of France was by destroying Nazi Germany, correct?
That's right.
And it seems to me that this was a position which is a tenable position, and mutatis mutandis, it's a tenable position.
No,
today,
because mutatis mutandis
well, explain
changes
to me
everything
why.
in this
Explain
case.
to me why.
Because in this case,
as you know, it's not only I,
Yeah.
but people with whom I disagree, like
Yes,
Arthur Schlesinger Jr., who refers to your theological certitudes and your liberal application of them to every subject in which you touch. So the subject of your own intolerance of other people's point of view is, I think, itself linguistically interesting.
First of all, I don't accept that criticism. You see, if you look at that quotation, you'll notice that I put it in there, and recall the context. I said that when I argue the issue, I feel a tone of moral and emotional falseness, which I want to explain, but then I go ahead to argue the issue. So that's a side remark intended to explain my own feeling of emotional and moral falseness, which is real. I do feel it. But nevertheless, I then go ahead for 300 pages or so to discuss this and related issues.
Yeah, but
so I don't really believe that it's fair to say that I'm not willing to tolerate other positions.
Yeah, the trouble is you don't end the book by saying I'm kind of odd in feeling this. You say everybody is odd who doesn't agree with me, right?
No, I don't think so. Do I say that?
This is certainly the burden of your book.
I wasn't aware of that. Yeah. I mean, I think that I've given an argument.
Well, maybe this is a universal difficulty you're having, not being aware of certain people's reading of your position.
Well, then let me say, I think there are, for example, I think I take a very qualified and temperate position on many, many issues in this book. For example, take the issue of the background of the Second World War, which I spent a lot of time on. If you notice, I end up with a statement saying that I don't see any way to give a clear, sharp resolution, clear, sharp answer to the question what we should have done under such and such circumstances. I discussed someone who did take a very strong and I think very honorable position, namely A.J. Musty. And I say that I wish I could answer the question for myself whether I feel that I would have taken or would have rejected that position, but I don't see any way to do it because the issue is mixed. And on many issues, I feel that way. On the other hand, see, when the issue is when the issue is, let's say, 3 million tons of bombs dropped on Vietnam, I don't feel that way anymore. Nevertheless, I'm still perfectly willing to argue the issue calmly, quietly.
As you would have, say, the dropping of the bombs in Dresden.
Exactly, or the atom bomb, let's say. See, I
But,
would have been willing to argue the dropping the atom bomb, though I do feel that it's a war crime.
Sure. But I do think that you put some people at a disadvantage by your a priori assertion that any position that disagrees with your own is intellectually barren.
Well, I didn't mean that, really. Let me explain. Maybe
Sure.
it didn't come across, but what I meant was something else. I wanted to honestly state my own emotional and my own feeling about entering into a debate over this
Sort
issue.
of Portnoy-wise.
No, I think that the point is that I think it's only fair to an audience of readers to say this is the way I approach the issue, and you read me on the basis of this understanding the best I can give as to the way I'm approaching this issue. And it's perfectly true that when I do, if you notice what I say is that increasingly over the years in discussing this issue, I felt this feeling of emotional and moral falseness. And I think it would only be honest to express it.
Sure.
Then to go ahead with the discussion.
Oh, quite so. But you also say that you hate yourself for not having come to that position earlier.
Yeah, I do. I think that was a very great mistake.
Well, I hope to give you a little solace in the course of the
Won't
But
do.
the reason I do raise this, and I rejoice in your disposition to argue the Vietnam question, especially when I recognize what an act of self-control this must involve.
It does.
Sure.
It really does. I mean, I think that
And
this is
you're
the
doing
kind of
very well.
issue
You're doing very well.
Sometimes I lose my temper. Maybe not. No.
Maybe not tonight. Because if you would, I'd smash you in the goddamn face. You say in
It's a
your
good
book,
reason for not losing my temper.
you say the war is simply an obscenity, a depraved act by weak and miserable men.
Including all of us, including myself,
Well, then-
including that's the next sentence. Same sentence.
Sure, because you count everybody in the company of the guilty.
I think that's true in this case.
But
See, one of the points I was
this is a
trying...
sense of theological observation, isn't it?
No, I don't think so.
Because as somebody points out, if everybody's guilty of everything, then nobody's guilty of anything.
No, I don't.
That's true,
Well,
that.
no, I don't believe that. See, I think the point that I'm trying to make, and I think ought to be made, is that the real, at least to me, I say this elsewhere in the book, what seems to me a very, in a sense, terrifying aspect of our society and other societies is the equanimity and the detachment with which sane, reasonable, sensible people can observe such events. I think that's more terrifying than the occasional Hitler or LeMay or other that crops up. These people would not be able to operate were it not for this apathy and equanimity. And therefore, I think that it's, in some sense, the sane and reasonable and tolerant people who share a very serious burden of guilt that they very easily throw on the shoulders of others who seem more extreme and more violent.
No, I agree, but surely the emotional temperature of yourself or of myself or of other people is not in and of itself an automatic index to the righteousness of our emotions.
Certainly not.
As
I
we
wouldn't
know,
mean
for
it to be
instance,
infinitive.
people were approximately equally wrought up in the late 30s over whether or not America should help the Western powers that defend themselves against the Axis powers. And I think it is incorrect to suppose that people of either side were necessarily right simply because they were exercised.
Oh, I'd agree with that totally.
Yeah.
There's no connection whatsoever
No connection
between
whatsoever,
degree of emotion and degree of correctness.
But as you understand the
All right, probably as good a time as any to stop to comment for a minute. Yeah, good. Finished my sandwich. Got the towel skirt, so I can do this right.
Yeah, attaboy.
Yeah.
If I'm going to listen to William F. Buckley, I'm going to drink his People's Fine alcohol.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so which is kind of funny, by the way.
Interesting.
Yeah, please.
I just love how, when people are already commenting the sweet, young-looking Noam Chomsky. And it's true, young, handsome fella here with a lot of horrible years to beat him down in front of him there. But I love how calm and even-handed he is. Like, you can really see he's still – these are his relatively early days of publicly engaging in big platforms about, political issues, because he very much really has that scientisty, like, when Buckley gives this very big bad faith interpretation, it says like, well, maybe this is a problem. You just don't listen to other people's voices in general. These little feet affectations. Which is itself hilarious, because everyone knows the stereotype about Chomsky's books is that they're ludicrously thickly footnoted, right, and they're filled with supporting documents. And sometimes people, reactionary critics mock his books for being, a thicket of references. Like, people will criticize you either way,
Yeah,
but I like how young he is. He's just so good faith. He says, "Well, I didn't intend it that way. Here's what I intended." Like, this is like, he's fresh here. You can tell.
Yeah, definitely. And really, I mean, Chomsky's favorite rhetorical move, I think always, I read like a Vietnam era book by him not too long ago, and I think he's doing this stuff already though. I'm trying to remember, but Chomsky's favorite rhetorical move is always to like find, the place where he can directly quote the exact words of like some Pentagon document and then like do constant callbacks to it, for the rest of the chapter.
That's true.
So yeah, he definitely always shows his work. But yeah, so I do definitely get the way that Chomsky's being very, very scientisty, here. I mean, it's also just like what I like, one of the things that I find most appealing about Chomsky's persona, which is just that like, he's going to give you this like really like carefully laid out, meticulous argument and just kind of bulldoze with it. Which is what he's, what he's doing here. I mean, he's just very unflustered, by Buckley. And he's like, yeah, no, well, yes, I here's what I said. Here's what I meant. This is the exact distinction between that and what you're saying.
It's interesting, because Buckley like has this formidable reputation. You definitely read more of his work than I have, but I've seen other episodes of his little show. And we had Harrington on, which we watched together, and other stuff. And he has like like a very, I don't know how well Buckley's intimidating charisma has aged today. I don't know if people still recognize that like New England, Harvard-y sort of like, my confrere. Like, I don't think people respond to that the way they used to. All today's right-wing intellectuals know to play it like they all like have blue-collar, long-distance truck driving jobs. They all pretend that. I don't know how common this is.
For the most part.
Yeah,
for the most part, they do that. I will say that, I mean, Shapiro definitely doesn't. He's, I mean, not that he sounds at all like Buckley, but in some like weird, degraded way. I mean, like he is sort of trying to be an intellectual. Even Charlie Kirk, in some weird way, like, he does these things like, he's very like, he'll like quote little snippets from like Thomas Aquinas or whatever, that are like just kind of like phrased, like it's all Wikipedia level, but like, he'll quote a phrase or whatever. So there is like a little bit of an affectation there. But certainly, I mean, Buckley's, a very extreme version of it. Somebody asked in the chat whether Buckley was British or just weird. And the answer is he was just weird, although he wasn't weird in a idiosyncratic way. He was weird in the way that like was not uncommon for a certain kind of like Yale educated blue blood.
Yeah, and this is still a type, of course. But yeah, I think this used to be like, back when, the East Coast was more dominant in general in the U.S. economically and culturally. Maybe it was more of a presence.
No, that's and Matt L. That is absolutely true. Family Guy has done several jokes about this exact pattern of speech when they'll portray like people who are like deep wasps, or like the joke they did about the offices of the New Yorker. They have them all basically talk like William F. Buckley, which is not even really. It's not even really that much of a pseudo-British or even transatlantic accent. It just registers to us that way because it's fancy. Like it, like all it really is that he's just speaking very slowly, like this,
Yeah. But also very boring. A weird yet boring accent. Try and do it. Like it's not so easy. I will say, like so far,
practice.
Yeah, and in this, like so far, these guys are really still sort of circling each other. But we've already gotten like to the first tell moment where Chomsky says, "Yeah, I wouldn't lose my temper," and Buckley says, "If you did, I'd punch you in your goddamn face." Ha 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 ha. You're like, what a great joke that is. But it's also, if you lost your temper, I'd punch you in your goddamn face. Like a little bit more than just like a.
It's like that's what Oscar Wilde used to tell people, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's when he threatened to slap people. That was with his gloves. That was very similar to this. So I don't know. That's an interesting moment. Chomsky just laughs it off completely, so that's nice. But one thing I really liked is that
it is, and it's good. And by the way, it's a very good choice because the last thing you want to do in this kind of thing is to give anybody an excuse to think that they got you mad, right? Like,
yeah, getting emotional is how you lose debates, and we all recognize, for better, good or worse, that's like sort of become like the big thing. And that's when you own a lib, is when you make them unhappy. That's how great our discourse has become. I want to refer quickly to one of the commenters earlier, Bocci, who made the point. Can you imagine Dave Rubin using Latin phrases such as mutatis mutandi? Well, funny, because just today I was on the Twitter machine that they have, and someone had disparagingly posted a recent clip from the Dave Rubin program in which he was displeased about the designations and concern about the new Omicron variant of the coronavirus. And you may have seen this today. He goes, Omicron, Omnicron, Starscream, it's all gibberish. It's all crazy. Like, it's the fucking Greek alphabet, you fucking inbred. Like, but so can you imagine him using Latin? Well, he can't do Greek, so I don't think like the odds are.
Yeah, no, like if he doesn't even know literally
Omicron. It's gibberish. It's a fucking ancient language that from the civilization you pretend to care about. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not even like knowing. I mean, I certainly don't know Greek. I certainly can't read or speak Greek, but I do recognize the alphabet. If nothing else, it's on all those frat houses and sororities.
Yeah, these are the jerk-offs that are obsessed with being alpha. Yeah, exactly. Like it's they know enough to be in.
Yeah, so they know at least the first letter. Yes.
Jackass.
No, exactly. It's ridiculous. I should say, by the way, the thing about Buckley's accent, and I saw our friend Straw McCollum in the chat, was talking about different accents, which actually the history here is a little complicated and weird. It'd be a total tangent, but like my understanding is that what we lots of like Southern pronunciations are actually closer to what English sounded like in England like 600 years ago, and there is like obviously an influence from like more recent English, more recent British English pronunciation in the New England accent, although in a really weird way, because like I think a lot of it came from a historical period where a lot of people were like literally doing stuff like taking diction classes from British people to try to sound fancy, and some of that stuff actually managed to filter down to like poor people Boston accents in kind of a funny way. But yeah, I also the thing about the accent does remind me. I don't know. Straub thinks that's sort of a myth, so who knows? I would certainly not claim anything except for that it was a funny thing I remember reading. But in any case, I think that point about Buckley sounding British to Americans. Christopher Hitchens wrote this book in 1996, Blood, Class, and Empire, about the relationship between the U.S. and the UK. And I remember him actually mentioning that in there, that like how like British transplants in America. I always thought that was kind of funny when people said that. But it certainly tells you something about the role of like Britishness in the American imagination, which is a fun book. I mean, that's the one where he talks about how this is sort of still just barely a version of Hitchens who's more good than bad on foreign policy, and he talks about how it's a shame that like in America being an Anglophile means that you like the monarchy and country houses, masterpiece theater, and all that stuff. And in Britain, being pro-American means that like you want the Pentagon to know that we'll never let you down. When he says it'd be much better if being an Anglophile meant that you wanted to replicate the NHS, and being pro-American meant that you wanted to replicate the Freedom of Information Act in Britain.
Yeah, that's I just remember reading that and going, I can really see why people had so much. That's just so well chosen. I could see why people had so much appreciation for Hitchens and felt such pain over the course of his long career arc. People can read more about it in the exciting new Chris Hitchens biography I heard is coming out.
Yeah, I heard that too. So there you go.
It's very juicy, man.
Yeah, and also I've got to say, J. Andrew World really outdid himself on that cover image.
Yeah, that's like a very nice little piece of work. It's so attractive. Yeah, that's very good.
Yeah, and yes, absolutely. The feeling very warm thoughts the last few days for the people of Barbados becoming a republic and no longer having the descendant of medieval tyrants, be their nominal head of state.
Yeah, the good kind of Republicans is this. Like this should be.
Yeah, exactly. All right. No reason the UK shouldn't follow suit. All right.
That's right. Damn right. More the merrier.
Existing situation, it ought to be, in your judgment, a transparently evil thing that we are engaged in, and you are derivatively concerned because there isn't. Because there is not a shared sense of indignation, like your own.
Now, I don't say that I am right because I am indignant. Rather, I say that I think in this case I am right to be indignant, which is different. I have to prove that.
You are right to be indignant if you are right.
That's right, and that has to be demonstrated. That's why
that
I
has
have,
to be demonstrated, which is why
dozens of pages of argument about
Sure.
it, which may or may not convince people. Convinces me. Yeah.
Sure.
But I agree.
Well, let me, excuse me, did I interrupt you? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Let me ask you this. If in fact your concern is to communicate your moral concern, to what extent have you spent a time thinking about your techniques? Now, I say this seriously because it is probably true that under certain circumstances, the communication of one's own indignation and fury and restraint is best communicated emotionally, i.e. one's own satisfaction, by screaming and yelling.
Right.
But if it becomes observable that this doesn't bring people around, then you've got to consider the problem of communication, which becomes a moral problem, just as you would consent to argue Auschwitz or Buchenwald with somebody if there was a chance of dissipating something of the sort. Now, if you have given that problem any thought, how come that you end up saying, as you do in your book, that Senator Mike Mansfield is, quote, the kind of man who is the terror of our age?
Well, let me put that in its context as well. What I say is, I believe that, and what I say is that Senator Mansfield is an American intellectual in the best sense, a sane, reasonable, scholarly man, the kind of man who is the terror of our age. And that's essentially what I was saying before. I think that the terror of our age is the
mass man,
the sane, responsible, serious, quiet man who watches these things unfold and doesn't react to them. I include myself in that, as I tried to make clear in the earlier statements.
Well, if, put it this way, your counsel is surely a counsel of despair if, on the one hand, you accost us with your own relative moral superiority, and yet end up despising yourself, appealing to scrupulosity for your own shortcomings. I mean, this makes things pretty.
Not really. For one thing, I don't feel any relative moral superiority, and I tried, maybe failed, but I tried very hard to express that in the book. That I said somewhere in the beginning that if there is any tone of self-righteousness or anything like that, it's unintended and certainly undeserved. And I mean that very much.
Mhm.
See, I mean, after all, given the feelings that I have, which I've just expressed, and which you perceive, I should be doing really strong things, which I don't think I am doing. So there's no sense of moral superiority. And I'm not interested in simply, throwing blame around or giving people marks.
Mhm.
I think that the beginning of wisdom in this case is to recognize something about what we stand for in the world, what we're doing in the world. And I think when we do recognize that, we will feel an enormous sense of guilt. And I say somewhere in there that one should be very careful not to let confessions of guilt overcome the possibility of action. I say that confessions of guilt can be very good therapy, as they can, as is well known. They're also very good preventative to action. And I think one should be very wary of that. In fact, I remember.
Well, I think we should.
I have some remarks
I think
about
that your formulation of it is at least saintly, but it still is a dislocating, at least, to people who fancy themselves as spending an equal amount of time attempting to refine their whole apparatus of moral discrimination, and who come up with conclusions directly at variance with your own. Now, the reason I haven't asked you at this moment to say, why are we in Vietnam and such and forth is because we've been all arguing about this for 4, 5, 6 years, and the chances of our coming up with anything, especially new, are small.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the respects in which I think it is sort of an unarguable issue. Now, the issues have just, one has been over them over and over and over again.
Yeah. But there are perhaps certain aspects of the quarrel in Vietnam that touch especially on your thesis and your concern and the whole nature of it. And that is the suspicion that some people have of a double standard of selective indignation. For instance, you refer to the heroic Vietnamese resistance to American power.
I think it's absolutely heroic.
Yeah, sure.
Amazing.
Now, I understand I understand enough about language to understand the use of heroism in that way.
If you notice, there are a few lines below, I say, or above, I say something about quite apart from any question of politics.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Right. Now, suppose I were to write about the heroic resistance of the Nazis to the Liberation Army, for instance, their use of torture, the use of mass reprisals.
I don't consider that heroic.
Well, why is that heroic? I mean, that means that they were doing everything they possibly could.
No, I don't think that heroism doesn't. Well, then I think we do disagree on the use of language.
But
I don't think that reprisals against
we do know that Viet
population
Cong have used fire weapons to destroy whole villages, children, that they have disemboweled mayors and so on and so forth and hung them up and all that kind of stuff. Now, this is heroic, I understand.
No, that is not.
Oh.
That's depraved.
That's depraved.
In my opinion. Yeah.
So
but that's very, very marginal. In the Viet Cong.
Well, why is it marginal?
In fact, it's marginal. That's a question of fact.
It's a question of fact, yeah.
The question, in fact, it's quite, I think there's perfect unanimity about this in the people who've studied it. For example, if you look at someone like, say, Douglas Pike, American Foreign Service agent, is the chief expert on the Viet Cong, and you read his book carefully, you discover that he points out that it was in response to the American military effort that the Viet Cong turned from their attempt to build mass popular support by through the organizational methods that involved giving people an actual role in organizing and controlling their own society and institutions. They turned from that to physical force in reaction to the American intervention. Well, and if you read, I have many examples of this quoted in the book from aid documents, let's say, or from pacification manuals where people point out.
By the same token, you can say that the Nazis turned to torture in France in reaction to Eisenhower's landing in Normandy. The answer is that people so disposed to act are certain kinds of people, and I yearn for a recognition of this in your writings or in Douglas Pike's. As a matter of fact, Douglas Pike, as you know, has certain difficulty with the fact that it is acknowledged that up to 25,000, 30,000 people were individually killed by terrorists before.
When was that?
America's, it was between 1958 and 1962.
I think 9,000 is the figure that's given usually.
Well,
right, and it's interesting to see what it was. I mean, if one really wants to talk about Viet Cong terror during the period prior to the American intervention, then again, I think just about all commentators, Dennis Warner, Bernard Fall, whoever you like, has agreed that by and large, this was terror directed extremely selectively against oppressive and external village officials.
The burning of Joan of Arc was selective.
Pardon?
The burning of Joan of Arc was selective too.
But I think
the point is, it was intended to establish a universal point.
It was
so
intended
was the execution of Eichmann selective.
Well, but you see, there's a very big difference. I think, you see, if you want to, personally, I'm against all kinds of terror, no question. But if you want to understand the Viet Cong situation, then let's recognize a very great distinction. At least I recognize. Let's see what the political point of the terror was. See, after all, during that period, there were about 9 or 10,000, according to American sources, there were maybe 9 or 10,000 village officials of one sort or another killed by the Viet Cong, largely with the support of the villages. But at the same time, recall that there were perhaps 160,000 Vietnamese, if we accept Bernard Fall's figures again, killed by the Saigon government and the Americans. This is prior to 1965. That was a very different kind of terror, both in quantity and also in its political content.
I know, but if it seems to me that you are attempting here to match things which are not equal.
No, 9,000 and 160,000 are by no means equal, nor is the political point.
I use that, and I'm prepared to answer. My point is that one presumably distinguishes between an act of terrorism, which you called depraved a moment ago, and
what you described, like burning a village, is depraved.
Yeah, a military action,
which is equally
part
depraved,
of military operation.
which is even more depraved. For example, you see, well, let me give you some examples of what I consider depraved.
Yeah.
Actions. Malcolm Brown, back in 1962 or 3, I don't remember, reported, it was I think AP or UP correspondent, reported that Saigon officials were sending American Skyhawks, airplanes over Vietnamese villages to wipe them out with napalm raids in order to cover instances of graft, for example. Well, that's, I think, depraved. Incidentally, I don't condemn that because, you see, just to mention this matter of double standard, there are really 3 kinds of terror in Vietnam. There's Viet Cong terror, there's the Saigon government terror, and there's American terror. And if you read what I've written, I say practically nothing about either Viet Cong terror or terror carried out by the Saigon government. Now, if one wanted to talk about that, one would have to point out that the terror carried out by the Saigon government is incredibly greater in extent and has a very different political purpose, which one could discuss. But I restrict myself to discussing American terror.
On that generality,
but
I gather that you believe it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do, and we could, that then does become a matter of fact, which one could discuss. Yeah, but I, as a matter of principle, almost restrict myself to the discussion of American terror. Not the terror carried out by the various sides in Vietnam, for many reasons. For one thing, because it's just qualitatively different in scale, and for another thing, because I feel that we have some responsibility for it. See, I don't. In the same sense, I don't talk about that. I've never written about the terror carried out by both sides in Nigeria, let's say. I don't like it, obviously, but I don't see any point in my giving them good or bad marks for it. On the other hand, if we were carrying out the terror, I would very definitely write about it. And I think, so there's no double standard as far as I can see. At least, let's say I have a standard in mind, one may or may not accept it.
We will explore that.
Okay.
That's kind of funny that the signal, the commercial breaks, I guess, with that little doorbell sound.
Yeah, I don't know why that's kind of funny. Very Cold War somehow, I think the sound that America knows, the husband's home for his martini and beer and not talking. That's exciting. Maybe it's something related to that.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting, this is all very familiar. It's like, oh, well, you say this, that's outrageous. How could you say the Vietnamese are heroic? They do atrocities. After we burn down their country for 7 years, they do atrocities. It's terrible. Yeah, round goes to Chomsky, indeed. Honestly, there's things we can say about this. What I was just thinking now was, though, it is such bullshit that Buckley died in 2007 and didn't get to see his economic system that he made completely collapse the next year and Iraq utterly fall apart. He got to check out just before several of his most godforsaken, hoary, reactionary dogshit ideas really, really imploded. He got to live for the fuck around and died for find out. Chomsky is still alive watching Buckley's wonderful harvest bear fruit. This is, I don't know. That's just what it is. That's what's in my mind. That's not a comment.
No, fair enough. Yeah, I think 2008 particularly, I will say, yeah, I think he was already trying to back off of his Iraq war support by the time that he died. He obviously supported it when it mattered, but I think that probably by 2007 it had gotten embarrassing. Whatever. He was supporting the war in Vietnam, while it was, like anybody, I believe, actually, do we have the exact year that this is from? Let me see if I can find this.
Yeah, by all means.
I
would say it's tall men's socks 02. Long ass hosiery on those guys.
Yeah. that was the style at the time. But yeah. Okay, so apparently this is 1969, right? So like, I think like, for example, by the time this happened and William F. Buckley is still shilling for the war in Vietnam, like Robert McNamara had thought that the war was unwinnable for like years already at this point, right?
Yeah,
like that's what he admitted.
Yeah, you're right. This is way after the Tet Offensive too, when like most people got the message, like, "Oh, this is just we're never gonna kill all these commies. We should pull out or something." Like this is like the day for this one.
No, exactly. I remember Hal Draper has a essay about the Vietnam War. So I'm sure a lot of people don't know who that is, but Hal Draper was an American socialist. He was somebody who had been part of like Max Shachtman's, I'm not going to take anybody through the org chart of the splits and fusions of little socialist groups in, the late 20th century. But anyway, he was like, he was like associated with that, but took a better path. And he, if you go to Marxists.org, you can find an essay by Hal Draper about the Vietnam War, where he makes that point really powerfully about the Tet Offensive, because he says, of course, from his perspective, he was against American intervention regardless. But he really makes the point that that's where, the Tet Offensive in 1968 is where there was really no claiming that this was primarily a Vietnamese civil war that the United States was intervening in, as opposed to a war of national liberation waged by the Vietnamese against the United States, because not because it was a military victory, for the Viet Cong, it wasn't at all, right? But because it wouldn't have been able to happen at all if by that point, like the sort of brutality of the American bombing and napalm into the country, and and all of the strategic hamlets and all those like nightmarish policies that the ecocide the United States was engaged in Vietnam had gotten so bad that really the Vietnamese population was pretty united against around the Viet Cong. I mean, obviously not 100%, right? There were there are plenty of like anti-communist Vietnamese people who came to the United States after after we lost, but like, think about this. How are you getting, like, this is Draper's point, just the fact that people were setting up like arms depots and outposts and stuff for this offensive all over Saigon for weeks, right? Because that's how long it would have taken to set this up, and nobody reported them, to the government is something that's like, it's the kind of thing you're only going to get in situations like, to use the exact historical example that Buckley is using in such a slimy way in this debate, like Nazi occupied France, where like, everybody basically supports the resistance, or if not everybody, close enough.
Yeah, anybody not directly involved in collaborating or profiting from it, will be putting aside their previous differences because it's such an all-consuming, totalizing thing. And what would be even more than that, not even merely a neighboring country occupying you, like with France, intolerable enough, obviously, but some godforsaken gringos coming from 5,000 miles in the opposite side of the biggest ocean on the entire planet to tell us that the French, who came here from another place several thousand miles away on the planet, they were right to control us, and we will now control you. And you won't let us, we'll completely annihilate your country. Little things like that are enough, to like coalesce people, who might have hated each other's guts 5 years ago, but now
exactly.
We will never get anything back or have any freedom or dignity until we get rid of these scumbags. Like, nothing unites a population like that. Yeah, and then you're right. Next thing you know, you can have people planting like fairly large amounts of munitions all around what was, even then, like a big, major city in that country, because there's so much support. People just look the other way, or, like you're spilling the, okay, good, you got that's like a beautiful thing that happened in a way, because it's, you know, a national liberation struggle. Like, as much as it's violence, I mean, we chose that violence. Which this whole like debate, this whole section here is about. Well, why do you bring up this thing? Why do you support the Vietnamese? Why don't you talk about how horrible Russia is? Like, his point, like we're killing the Vietnamese.
No, exactly. This is
like,
a point
we're doing that. Like, we should care the most about it because it's going to be on our fucking gravestones and on our fucking obituaries as our legacy. Like, it's only reasonable.
No, exactly. I mean, this is a point that Chomsky has like really consistently pushed over the decades. That it's like, yeah, I mean, you can. I mean, sure. I mean, like it's like. It's like this like weird thing that happens sometimes where there's some like left-wing black person who, somebody's trying to discredit and they demand, and so they'll say, do you disavow Louis Farrakhan? And it's such a weird game because Louis Farrakhan has no importance whatsoever in American politics and no power over anything. But like the only reason his name ever comes up is when the demand is raised that people disavow him. And it's like, okay, sure. I mean, I could disavow Louis Farrakhan. That's nice, if whatever good that does anybody.
For the 10 people who remember who that is,
Yeah, exactly. And it's like the same point here. It's like, yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, I could denounce the whatever's going on in this war in Nigeria that the United States has absolutely nothing to do with. I mean, but like, you'll excuse me if I want to spend a lot more of my time on something that as an American citizen I might actually have some control over.
Yeah, and which is like on my fucking head too. Like, it's my stupid tax dollars paying for this. Like, what Russia's doing in Czechoslovakia is terrible, but like. And there are things we can do, and we shouldn't accept that. But like, we're not doing that. Like, this one was much worse, and we're doing it. I mean, this is many, many World War IIs we dumped on this incredibly poor country that have been fighting the French already for decades on end. It's like just such an indefensible thing. But you can roll in and say, you say the Vietnamese are heroes. They burned down a village. Where'd they get the idea they can fucking do that? That's crazy. So you're a hypocrite, Noam Chomsky. But if you're some intellectual Cold War audience, I mean, you probably accept that from Buckley, like they're communists. We're still fighting World War II, basically.
Yeah.
You believe a lot of bullshit if you believe things.
No, exactly. I mean, that's the line, right? I mean, I think it's getting a lot less plausible by 1969, but that's the line. Like, this is basically World War II, just like with the communists instead of the Nazis. But of course, I mean, the point that Chomsky's making really powerfully there is. Look, it's the point is not that the Viet Cong never did anything wrong, right? But like, even above and beyond the question of, yes, as an American, I should primarily be concerned with stuff that America does, not, both because it's the part that's most relevant to me, and also because, it's by far the greatest contributor to the violence going on in Vietnam. But also, like, in that example, like, yeah. I mean, whether you support it or not, right? Whether you think it's a good thing or not, like, there just is a difference between assassinating like officials who are collaborating with this unpopular government and just dropping like massive bombs that that destroy entire villages and men, women, and children. Like, those things are very different.
Yeah, and you poison the world for decades on end, and you leave mines, and we'll strangle them economically too. Like, don't forget how long it took us to take our boot off their fucking neck after that too. It's just because it's like
that was like the Clinton administration finally, when the United States lifted the embargo in Vietnam, right? So it's
close to when China got WTO, like they were paired, I think. Yeah, that's. It is kind of stunning to compare that, like, just completely stomping on a poor, like, fairly helpless country, like helpless to ever strike us back. Like, what did the Vietnamese ever do to us? And it's always like, well, my friend went there and he was all fucked up when he came back. Like, oh, holy shit, how dare they? Why didn't they welcome your friend and his machine gun and his Latin American dictatorship? I don't understand. Like, what happened to us? It's very different from that versus anything that we've ever had to cope with.
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean, not even like, there's no remote analog in American history.
Not really.
To this. I mean, the British in the 1770s, were arrogant and imperial and oppressive, but they certainly weren't napalming the countryside.
Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess people talk about 1812 and 14 and burning down the Capitol, and you're like, okay, like that's a good start. But they didn't reoccupy America for like 25 years. Like that didn't happen. Like that was our, just a couple really bad moments. Like that's not, you can't like it, and that's 2 fucking centuries ago. Throw that in there too.
Yeah, right. But I mean, like there was no, like the British in 1812 weren't transplanting massive parts of New England and and like loading people onto, I don't know, horses and buggies and like taking them to strategic hamlets.
Yes, strategic villages. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's nothing even close. I mean, that actually, I remember this occurred to me in 2003. My sister lives in the UK. I was visiting her then. Obviously, it was like not that many months after the Iraq War started. And I remember seeing this letter to the editor at a British newspaper that did bring it home to me that, I mean, to a point, right? I mean, like still not the same, but I mean, like the that like British people, and I always wondered if this is part of why the anti-war movement was so much bigger there. Did have like some older British people actually did have relevantly similar experiences. I remember seeing this letter to the editor of this British newspaper in 2003, where this person was reminiscing about the Blitz during World War II, and hoping that hoping that the place where they were hiding out in the basement, cowering, wasn't mistaken for a military target. So yeah, I mean, I think that is some analogy. But yeah, the thing you said earlier reminded me of Rick Perlstein, the historian. He's got this series of books about the history of the conservative movement. It's Before the Storm, which is about the Goldwater campaign and Nixon Land and the Invisible Bridge, the fall of Nixon and Eyes of Rig. That's what's called. And then there's like a new one called Reagan Land. But the Invisible Bridge, I think, he's got a great line where he talks about, all of this sort of POW, MIA, agitation, in the mid 70s. And he says that, if you were just reading American newspapers at this point, you might get the impression that the United States went to that like all of these people were just kidnapped from like their beds in Wisconsin, by the Vietnamese, and maybe the United States went over there in order to try to rescue them.
That's great. Yeah. I'll never forget what Vietnam did to us. Abducted all of our military-aged men and took them. Yes. We're the ones, who are based out of battleships and aircraft carriers and stuff. I forgot about that. Okay.
Yeah.
History. I think you could see fairly clearly through Buckley here. It's a lot easier with the years anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, let's keep going.
Mr. Chomsky, we're talking there about American terror, and I think you make a very accurate observation that we are responsible for what we do, but hardly responsible for what other people do, except insofar as we are in a position to influence them.
That's right.
For instance, if there is a mass starvation in Biafra, even though we did not cause it, there is a sense in which we are responsible if we don't do something to attempt to alleviate it. Now, by the same token, if we are prepared to agree that it is not always easy to taxonomize military action into that which is terroristic and that which is purely a military operation, we are left with doubts, for instance, about the bombing of Germany in 1942, 43, 44. You might contend that this was terroristic and unnecessary. And you might be right, although you're not a military expert, neither am I. But I think
there's a point to that.
But I do judge that even if we all agreed that what we did in Dresden was inexcusable, as a moral question, it's got to be understood in context of what was it that brought us to Dresden in the first instance.
Absolutely.
And what brought us to South Vietnam in the first instance, in my judgment, was clearly an uninterested, or I should say disinterested, concern for the stability and possibilities of a region of the world.
What
to which we were
period
committed by
are you
series
talking,
of
at what
alliances.
period do you feel that we had this disinterested relationship to Vietnam?
Right now.
No, at what period did we have it? Did it begin? Let's say 1951, for example, when
Well,
when the State Department bulletin points out that we must help the French reconquer their former colony, and we must eradicate all Vietnamese resistance down to its last roots in order to reestablish
I
the French in
personally
power.
wish,
Was that
yeah,
disinterested?
to increase my vulnerability, I wish we had helped the French.
We did. We
But
supported
not
them.
sufficiently. Not sufficiently.
Well, but
there's no point in helping
but
somebody
it's hardly,
insufficiently.
it was hardly disinterested when we attempted, as you know, with tremendous support, in fact, to reinstate French imperialism in South Vietnam.
Now, it was disinterested in this sense, and I think this is an important distinction which you do touch on in your book. It's a disinterested act if my attempt to help or your attempt to help a particular nation is in order to spare you the possibility of a great ordeal in the future, which will harm you, your family, your children, your republic.
And in that sense, Nazi Germany was also disinterested.
Yeah,
After all, Nazi Germany was conquering Eastern Europe
Correct.
only in order to advance the values of Christian spiritual civilization and to restore the Slavs to their rightful home and so on and so forth. Totally disinterested.
Look, I follow you. I follow you. But if you want me to pursue that digression, I will.
Okay.
But let's suspend it for a moment. I'm distinguishing that kind of disinterestedness between the kind of...
But that's not a kind of disinterestedness. That, you see, that's something which includes as a special case every case of military aggression and colonialism in history. It's all disinterested in your sense.
Well, all right, let me simply rest my case by saying that there is an observable distinction by intelligent men between a country that reaches out and interferes with the affairs of another country because it has reason to believe that a failure to do so will result in universal misery, and that country which reaches out and interferes with another country because it wants to establish Coca-Cola plants there and chase national banks and whatever and exploit it. Now, that is an observable.
It's a conceptual. Well, let's distinguish between a conceptual distinction and a factual
I'm prepared
distinction.
to do that.
All right, it is a conceptual distinction, but in actual fact, the history of colonialism shows that these two motivations can coincide. That is, practically every. I mean, there are exceptions. You know, probably the Belgians and the Congo are an exception, but by and large, the major imperialist ventures have been in the economic. In the material interest or in the perceived material interest.
I'm not interested in the mathematics of the, I'm interested.
Let me finish.
You have already conceded that it's not merely a conceptual difference.
I say it is.
There are exceptions.
There are a few exceptions.
All right.
Like say
okay. But let's talk about the exceptions then.
Well, no, but the exceptions are at the difference. No, wait a minute. The exceptions. I mentioned, for example, the Belgians and the Congo. There, they didn't even pretend to have a civilizing mission. There, it was pure material self-interest. These are the exceptions. There are, as far as I know, no exceptions on the other side. There are. I mean, maybe I've left out a case of history, but as I see the history of colonialism, the great mass of cases are cases where a powerful country was working in its perceived material self-interest and was covering what it was doing to itself and to the world with very pleasant phrases about preserving Christian values or helping the poor benighted natives or one thing or another. Now, there are a few exceptions where there's pure predatory imperialism. No, not even any pretense of doing anything, but these are quite rare.
And
we're in the mainstream of imperialism.
The
pure predatory imperialism?
Sure, the history of the Roman Empire.
Well, let's take one. I mean, since the Industrial Revolution.
Since the Industrial Revolution. Well, you know, if you say that people have refined the art of apologetics, I don't deny it. But it is also true, and I think manifestly true, that there have been interferences with the affairs of other nations whose purposes were, in my judgment, manifestly benign.
For example?
Well, for instance, the Truman Doctrine.
Oh, I don't think that was manifestly benign at all. That was an attempt to
the Greeks
develop
an benign. I think the
Greek situation was benign, not at all. We were
I say the Greeks' testimony is more interesting to me than yours.
Which Greek testimony?
The
testimony of the thousands of people who were thrown into jail and.
Well, I grant not the testimony of the Greek communists who were beaten.
Or the Greek peasants who were...
Well, there again, is it a conceptual difference that between the person who desires a life under some kind of freedom and one who desires life under some kind of... under communism?
Well, no, because there's no such opposition in Greece. There was a distinction between a very repressive regime, which we instituted in 1946, and another regime, I don't know what it would have been, that would have grown out of a victory of the so-called communists. Now, if you see, what we did had nothing to do with freedom. What we instituted was
this is absolute historical romantic. I would say
I don't
because
believe,
the number of people who were slaughtered in Greece first by the communist insurgency, then by the Nazis, then again by the communists. Add
The
up to
Nazi
an
communist
enormous
insurgency before the Nazis? Which one are
not
you talking about?
insurgency, conquest.
Communist conquest before the Nazis in
Communist
Greece?
insurgency.
Prior to the Nazis in Greece?
Yes, the civil war of the early 40s. My
Of the early
point,
40s,
my
prior
point
to
is
the
that
Nazis?
the
No,
Greeks.
your history is quite
No, that's
confused
not
there.
bad at all.
No.
No, it is
There was no communist insurgency prior to the Nazis. There were communist resistance bands
Well,
that fought against the
this
Nazis.
is a matter of nomenclature. The point is that the 40-year-old or the 45-year-old Greek has fought 3 times in certain ventures, in one of which they acknowledged that we bailed
Who is
them
they?
out.
Who is they? The rulers
well,
of Greece
yeah.
acknowledge that.
No, also the people.
Oh,
of
I'm
Greece.
quite unaware of that. I'm quite unaware that the people of Greece have
Well,
spoken on this issue.
even Papandreou, you like him, I assume, because he hates us.
No,
But
not at all. Not at
Papandreou,
all. George Papandreou was one of the people who
I'm
was.
talking
who
about
we
and I'm talking about Andrea, which makes it even.
Has Andreas Papandreou
They're
spoken?
both on record as being grateful to President Truman for his intervention in that part of the world in
In that case, I
1947.
disagree with him on that
Okay.
issue. I mean, I really
Yeah,
do. I think we had no
yeah.
right to intervene in Greece in 1947.
Now we're talking about rights,
And
which
I
gets
don't
us away
think
from
that
the
in any.
which gets us away from the
All
discussion.
right, let's talk about Let's talk about
The
whether we
discussion
did
is
it for
whether or not
disinterested.
there is such a thing as relatively disinterested international interference. And it seems to me
Well,
that
case was
America's
certainly
record
not
is rather good. We went through an imperialist phase, but we pulled out of it faster than any country in the history of civilization.
I think we're very deep.
Why
in
did
it
we
right
pull
at
out
the
of the
moment.
Philippines, for instance?
We pulled out of the Philippines because it became a bad investment.
Why?
Because if you look, American agricultural interests were very much opposed to the, back in the mid-30s, they were very strongly opposed to the free trade relationships which allowed Philippine crops to compete with them. That's why we pulled out of the Philippines.
Why do these agricultural interests authorize us to intervene in South Vietnam?
They did.
If you consider this is
Because we didn't intervene
this
on the
is the
basis
critical dimension.
No, I say that in the Philippines it was the critical dimension. Look, the world is a complex place.
I'm aware of
there
that.
are certain interests that were involved.
MIT is a complex place.
Well, there were certain interests that were involved in our Philippine venture. There are different interests that are involved in our Vietnam venture. You see, our Vietnam, don't forget that with the Second World War, America's imperial interests expanded enormously. I mean, prior to the Second World War, we were sort of a marginal imperialist power, except for the Monroe Doctrine. But since the Second World War, we became the world's major imperialist power. And Vietnam is simply one piece of an attempt to construct a very large integrated world system, of which Greece was another piece.
Yeah, we became an imperial power, Mr. Chomsky, in the sense that we inherited primary responsibility for any chain of action that might involve us in a third world war,
I don't believe that's what happened.
something that might involve the entire world in Holocaust. And
No, I
under
don't believe that's what
circumstances,
happened.
well, I know you don't believe it, but
In fact, I think that
it might be
our
refreshing to listen to this point of view, which is that there are people who do believe that America, unhappily and certainly not desiring it, inherited the responsibility for trying to abort international Holocaust, and has from time to time done so by such ventures as the Truman Doctrine, Marshall Aid, and things like that.
I don't agree
Is
with
Marshall
that.
Aid not disinterested?
No, Marshall Aid is quite different. First of all,
I'm sorry.
All right. Let's see.
That's great. Again, don't just debate people with the moderator. You're the moderator and you're one of the debaters. Very, very useful. You will never lose a debate. It's impossible. I don't know. We'll see if he lets him speak here. Maybe he'll be nice.
Yeah. I think there are some cases where people overcome that. But certainly a reason that Buckley likes that format. No doubt about that. I think I don't know. So At War with Dust says round to Buckley. I don't know about that. I think the Greece thing. I think Buckley sounded fairly foolish, right? That he's saying that like the people of Greece, have the collective opinion that the American meddling to prop up the dictatorship in Greece was a good thing. I mean, like that's like and I don't know. I mean, it seems like Chomsky's response to that is exactly the right one. It's like which Greeks are we talking about here, buddy? Right? I mean,
but again, still like so restrained. He said, I'm not aware that the Greek people support this. Might be the hoary Greek politicians that you read about, in
Right.
Wall Street Journal or whatever. Still a little more restrained than you couldn't get away with that now with Chomsky, I don't think.
Yeah, no, that is probably true. He is probably a lot more restrained here than he would be. He would be later. I think that. I think that Chomsky landed some really good points in this one. I mean, I think that the thing about about like imperial powers claiming that they were acting, benevolently in a disinterested way, and how this is what did he say? This is a special case that includes like almost all of the modern history of empires. Like that was pretty good.
Yeah, and Buckley, I remember, I think of that line often where Buckley said, well, let's focus on the exceptions. Let's focus on the weird little cases that aren't typical, because we focus on the ones that are typical, you're going to see everything we do fits in that category, and we're just going to look like a bunch of bastards. Let's look at the weird freak cases, because that'll keep us the furthest away from a big picture. But I don't know, you watch these shows, it's difficult to, it's fun to do, but it's difficult to really say, like who's got the upper hand at any moment. Like I will say, I thought, Chomsky kind of cold cocked him with that quote from those American planning documents about supporting the French and destroying the Vietnamese resistance. I mean, that was just that, and there you do see where Chomsky's, future rhetorical future is. Like, what about if I memorize 3 sentences from some obscure fucking security document that decapitates your argument, and I can just bring it out right now in front of everybody? It's very difficult just to, if you don't have like that level of fluency, it's tough to say that document's not representative, or you're misrepresenting that piece or something.
Yeah,
that was powerful, I thought.
Definitely. Thank you, Philip, for the super sticker. Silver, I like that point. Well, I think I mentioned it when talking to Sam, but the point originally comes from, at least my having seen the point, originally comes from Liz Brunig, who said that half the point of debate is to get the other person to tell you what they really think. And of course, Sam Cedar is the master of that. I mean, that's like the thing that he's best at in debates, is like drawing out some libertarian fanatic until they get to the point where they say, that condo collapse in Miami was the fault of the renters because they didn't they didn't do more research into the safety practices
great point
of the owners. And I can see what Silver means, right? I mean, there is a little bit of that in this round that that, like, I don't even think this was necessarily something Chomsky was trying to do at that point, but Buckley sort of weirdly volunteered it, that he said, like, Buckley just endorsed that it was a good thing to try to help France reconquer its former colony in Vietnam.
Yeah, it's true. And great point from Brunig there. And also, I remember, we discussed this on one of the previous shows. It might have been when we watched that Sam Cedar one. Like, to me, a big part of this is just you get the other side to commit to some fucking positions, because people really do, especially if you're not arguing with someone who's like a public intellectual and has written books and kind of nailed down their stances in certain ways. Like Chomsky, if you read about what was happening at this period, like he was kind of agonizing about leaving like the very comfortable, intellectually absorbing MIT linguistics milieu that he was in, and getting into politics and putting his skin on the line to fight to resist the Vietnam War at a time when that wasn't the cultural default. So I'm sure he did his research on friggin' Buckley. He probably knew more than he wanted to about Buckley before he made that decision. But when you debate people generally, I mean, it absolutely is the case. As Silver said a moment ago, like, get the other side to commit to some points, because if you don't, you'll say like, oh, okay, well, whatever, I don't really care about that. Here's my new shitty view. Like, there really is a value. And so when I argue with people, I'm sure I've bored people with this before, but I always say, like, say a little and then just kind of, you're trying to bait them out. And I always, it's like when you have a military engagement, you fall back a little bit to decoy the forces of your enemy out into the open. Not that I really like military, analogies. It has its place because it's stupid debate, Yes, you fall back, you let them come out from their cover, reveal their positions, at least some, and then you can, light them up with the Noam Chomsky quote that you memorized with your photographic Noam Chomsky memory. It's easy. He's easy. But I think we might, you might be seeing that here too. It's Buckley's just kind of weird like that too. I remember when we watched the film, I just had that thought. Like a lot, again, these modern conservative figures, you can kind of guess what they're going to say. And if you've read anything they've written, everything that every argument they're going to make. But some of these guys, like when we watched the Buckley documentary, I was like, why would you, what a weird choice. Like, I feel like he's one of those figures where I don't have any ability to guess what weird rhetorical gambit he thinks he's going to win next. Or is it for part of his affectation? Like, I'm always one step behind, I feel like, with this particular guy.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, right. I mean, like, at the risk of tooting my own horn too much, like, I don't think it is tooting my own horn too much, because I actually don't think it's, I don't think it's a particularly challenging case for this, but like, yeah, I mean, if you watch a few old Charlie Kirk debates, you pretty much know what Charlie's going to say, for the most part. Whereas, William F. Buckley, I mean, I think he was, extremely evil, but in, many ways, right? I mean, like going from his position on Vietnam, like his defense of the Vietnam War in 1969 to some of his comments on the AIDS crisis in the 80s to, et cetera, right? But he, we can go back to what National Review was saying about civil rights in the 50s. But I mean, it's not a moral compliment, but I mean, he is just clearly like a much smarter guy, and like he is gonna think on his feet better, and and all of that. Like so I mean, this is obviously a much more challenging thing.
Yeah, and I guess I mean, this is what we brought up, but just thinking about it more, like it really, eventually. It really is like at this time. This is a time when people over exaggerate it so much. Like conservatism's always had a home in America for sure, but this is a time when it was not the national consensus. Unlike today, you had a New Deal consensus then, and so like he had to try really hard and have a show. He's very even-handed to keep the ideas in the game. And Friedman had to make his show on Milton Friedman did make his show for PBS. Like this show, like he actually did that. Dirty PBS let him come on and talk about how evil PBS is. But now, and I mean, like there are right-wing intellectuals. We read their books, and I mean, it exists. Like I don't know, like Tyler Cohen, the George-based, conservative economist, written a couple articles reviewing his books with Nathan Robinson. And you read them, and they're just fucking like so thin. There's just like so little there, and the arguments are so weak. There's no like big framework, nothing. It's all gesturing back to Econ 101 and all of the nice assumptions that we build our market models on that don't really hold with capitalism for all the reasons you can read about. But like, there's so little of it doesn't feel like that it doesn't feel like they're hustling or they don't seem hungry. They don't seem hungry. That's what they say. Stay hungry when you're like struggling. These guys are not hungry, and it shows in their weak, flabby brains. That's my view. We're trying hard here. Maybe one day we'll win and get to be the lazy ones. Hasten that day.
Yeah. Inshallah. I would love that. That they're in like the 2060s. When like half of there have been, socialist party, parties in power in the United States, like on and off, and like half of the economy is part of the public sector or the co-op sector now, and all of the U.S. military bases overseas, have been brought home and all of that stuff, and like we just get this generation of incredibly lazy. American socialist commentators. That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, that is the thing. Like it's so rarely. I mean, your debate with Kirk obviously is like a rare exception. The organizers of that are still trying to get one going. Like for me and some other people. So we're trying to keep that going as best we can. Good. But to me, God, that's a beautiful one. I don't know. It's just kind of a stunning thing. Yeah, I mean, what you were just saying, to look at that decrease in punching power, because it never matters that these people have bad ideas, that they have no critical thinking, and they default to support for hierarchy and traditional power centers and shit like that. It never matters because they're also lazy cowards, and they don't want to read an opposing article, let alone a couple of books. The way the shit that we suffer through, like that takes having some guts and some willing to do some joyless work, we're hustling on that to that extent. I would love to see it on the right more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I don't. Oh, yeah. So thank you, Huzaifa. I hope I'm pronouncing that at least somewhat correctly for the super chat. Bisquick asked who started the bow tie dipshit trend. I think that predates Tucker Carlson.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to think actually.
Not really. He only got it back in the 90s when he was still wearing that before he became the white nationalist Bill O'Reilly replacement. Back then, the only other guy on TV who I know who wore a bow tie was Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Yeah.
It's a thin pool. Shallow pool.
Yeah. Yeah, no, fair enough. I feel like PG O'Rourke, maybe. Did he wear a bow tie?
Maybe. Or maybe was that really boring PBS NPR guy? That's also
Tom says George Will.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know. Anyway, yeah, I think that I mean, again, there is definitely, I mean, not to belabor this point too much more than we have already, but I mean, there is definitely a decline there from, I mean, look, we'll, say what you want about William F. Buckley, he's not flipping through a binder the whole time, but in any case,
list of 2-sentence rebuttals. Yes. That's,
yeah,
very
exactly.
Formidable look. That looks impressive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, fair enough. All right, let's go back and watch a little more.
I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you've now mentioned Marshall Aid for the first time, and Marshall Plan Aid has to be distinguished quite sharply from the Truman Doctrine.
Why?
Why? Because the Truman Doctrine was a doctrine of military intervention, and the Marshall Plan was our first attempt at a major aid program.
You do understand that sometimes a soldier can be as useful as a bushel of wheat, don't you?
Now, look. Nevertheless, if we're going to be at all clear about the American role, we're certainly going to distinguish between military intervention and economic intervention. They're very different in the way they function. Now, the fact of the matter is that neither was disinterested in your sense, I don't think, but they're very different in the impact that they had. The Truman Doctrine, I think, was a disastrous venture. I think the Marshall Plan was arguable. I mean, one understood what
how do you
for,
explain the schizophrenia?
I don't agree with it.
How do you explain the schizophrenia of a public which willed both more or less simultaneously? On the one hand, you say that the public is incapable of acting disinterestedly.
The public didn't will either.
Well, the government. All right,
the government. Because both were.
But the government backed by the public has that. How do you explain that the same government on Monday did the Truman Doctrine, which you consider simply sort of being a projection of the evil impulses of the government, and on Tuesday did something which you consider to be very good? What happened to the government between Monday and Tuesday?
First of all, I didn't say I considered it to be very good. I said it's rather different, and one has to bring different standards to bear in evaluating it.
Why is it different? Let me give you an example. Suppose you're a farmer.
Because there's a difference between receiving...
And you need agriculture. You need fertilizer. Yeah. So you apply to me for fertilizer. But just before I get it to you, somebody comes up with a bayonet and is about to make it impossible for you to continue farming. Now, in that particular instance, is there a strategic difference between my giving the fertilizer and my giving the soldier who routes?
That's not. You're talking about the dream world. The real world is one, because the real world is one in which the alternatives were coming with a bayonet, which is on an American rifle held by an American-backed Greek soldier, and the alternative to that was giving the kind of aid which was used, in fact, to construct the kind of society in Western Europe that we wanted to see developed there. Now, these are two very different things. It's a very different thing to introduce, to run for the Greek army a counterinsurgency program with military support and many military men involved. That's one kind of thing, one sort of repression imposed on the Greek population through American intervention. One might argue whether it's right or wrong, but that's
Why-
to be very sharply
Why do you say
distinguished.
imposed? Why do you say imposed? Is it because your presumption here,
My presumption is that
your
all
presumption here
military
is that the Greeks
well, let me tell you,
would
so you
like
don't
the
have to
kind
guess.
of regime
No,
which
look, my assumption
in
is that all
genocide?
intervention is imposed by any country. That is, you see, I
Well,
believe that quite
Did
generally.
we impose on the French when we liberated them from the Nazis? Was that an imposition?
We didn't conquer France. We moved the
The
Germans
hell
out
we
of it,
didn't.
just from an outside invading
Yeah,
force.
We invaded
But we
France.
didn't conquer it from its own people. See, in Greece, we were trying to conquer it from its own people.
There you're willing to credit the anti-Nazis as their own people, but you're not in Greece willing to credit the anti-communists as their own people.
The German army was there. There was no outside army in Greece other than ours.
Look, there are modalities of outside intervention.
But look, there's a very sharp difference between. Just a minute. There's a very sharp difference.
Laval was not a Nazi.
But Laval wouldn't have lasted for 5 minutes without the German army.
And nor would Makarios have lasted for 5 minutes without the help of Russian aid.
But wait a minute.
In fact, as you know, when Stalin got tired of Makarios, he
pulled
pulled out.
But look, now let's be careful again. I mean, there's a difference. First of all, I'm opposed to military aid to other countries, whether by us or by the Soviet Union. Well, let's come back to that because it's a more important thing. And that is that I'm even far more opposed to the imposition of regimes by foreign troops. Now, in the case of Germany, let's say, in the case of France, the Pétain government, the Pétain-Laval government, the Vichy government, was supported by German troops. Had the German, they weren't throughout the country necessarily, because there was certainly indigenous support, but there's no question that if German military force had been withdrawn to the other side of the Rhine, then there would have been an overthrow of the Vichy government, and France would have had some different form of government. Now, in that case, our invasion of France was, whether one likes it or not, was in reaction to an occupying external force. It's just pure confusion to identify that with the case of Greece, when we were trying to liberate, we were trying to select the kind of society that Greece would have, and we were trying to save the rulers that we had designated as appropriate from their own population. There were no outside forces.
But don't you realize that in your book, and that's why you're not willing to be consistent in carrying out this argument, you're constantly talking about our satellizing of places like Cuba and the Dominican Republic and so on and so forth, and yet we never occupied them in the sense in which you're talking about.
Well, we never occupied the Dominican Republic. We sent 25,000 troops there in 1965.
No, I'm talking about I'm talking
well,
about
the American Marines were in there dozens of times since 1900.
I think you're being evasive, and I don't think you
evasive?
want to be.
No,
Let me ask you this: is it possible?
It's not evasive at all.
Is it possible?
You know, we just simply repeatedly sent troops to
Is it possible?
Nicaragua, Dominican Republic, Cuba, et cetera, et cetera.
Is it possible to satellize a nation without having an occupying army there?
Yes, it is.
All right, then there goes your tedious French explanation.
Oh, not at all, because that doesn't happen to be the. You see, we're talking about a real situation.
Yeah.
We could talk about some ideal situation and have an academic discussion about it.
I'm saying, therefore, it is possible for North Vietnam to satellite South Vietnam, presumably, without even
it's logically
occupying militarily in a formal sense.
But it didn't happen, though. So
this is an argument considering which there are 2 points of view.
Well, let's discuss it then.
Historically.
Yeah, in fact, you see, there's much more. If you want to be serious about it, there's more evidence that South Vietnam tried to colonize North Vietnam than conversely. In fact, South Vietnamese commandos were going, military forces, regular military forces, were going north considerably earlier than the time when we even proclaimed that the infiltration began from north to south.
Did they bump into the refugees coming south?
The refugees were coming south were going in both directions, in fact, in 1954-55, and at least according to Bernard Fall, the commandos began going north in 56 or 57. The first claimed infiltration from the north was in 59, and that was South Vietnamese coming south. So if one wants to talk about, again, the real world, the first motion
the trouble is, your difficulty, Mr. Chomsky, is in my judgment, you never know where neatly to begin your historical
well, you choose the point of beginning.
Well, the point really is that if you're starting to say that 1959 was a provocation because it was
no, it wasn't a provocation.
Southerns going north,
I
say, well, but how about the people who were going from north to south who were talking about the misery that had been brought about Ho Chi Minh and so forth?
When was
that?
Well, which people are you talking about? I don't know.
Well, I'm talking about Vietnamese north and south. Your trouble, I think, is neatly captured in the remark made recently by Czechoslovakia, that Czechoslovakia is, after all, the most neutralist country in the world, since it declines to interfere even with its own internal affairs.
I'm afraid I don't see the relevance.
Well, the relevance is very simply that you start your line of discussion at a moment that is historically useful for you.
That's what I
The
say.
grand
You pick the
fact
beginning.
of
You
the
pick the beginning.
post-war world
Right.
is that the communist imperialists, by the use of terrorism, by the use of deprivation of freedom, have contributed to the continuing bloodshed. And the sad thing about it is not only the bloodshed, but the fact that they seem to dispossess you of the power of rational
May I
observation.
say something?
Sure.
Yeah. I think that's about 5% true, and or maybe 10% true. It certainly is.
Why do you give that?
May I complete a sentence?
Sure.
I mean, it's perfectly true that there were areas of the world, in particular Eastern Europe, where Stalinist imperialism very brutally took control and still maintains control. But there are also very vast areas of the world where we were doing the same thing. And there's quite an interplay in the Cold War. You see, what you just described is I believe, a mythology about the Cold War, which might have been tenable 10 years ago, but which is quite inconsistent with contemporary scholarship.
Ask a Czech.
Ask a Guatemalan, ask a Dominican, ask President of the Dominican Republic, ask a person from South Vietnam, ask a Thai.
Obviously, we can't get away if you can't distinguish between the nature of our venture in Guatemala and the nature of the Soviet Union's in Prague. Then we have real difficulty.
Explain the difference.
Sorry.
All right. Well, I would assume that there's no argument about how this round went. I mean, this is like Buckley at least seemed very composed up until this segment, and like he started feeling messy this time.
He does seem more flustered, and you can really tell because like the interruption count shot way up during this segment. My God. Constantly interjecting, constantly cutting him off. Again, more good debating techniques for the viewers to learn. Don't have scruples. Don't wait for your debate opponent to finish a sentence. They're just going to make some point that makes you look not right. So don't let them talk. Cut them off.
Yeah, although there's definitely a cost to that, right? I mean, like in terms of of how it makes you look. I mean, like I think there's a place like I'm not, I've interrupted many people, but I think if you're doing too much of that, it makes you look bad. I don't know. Yeah, exactly. But like really, like this is like in those last few minutes, like Buckley kept trying to make this move about like, oh, you're just trying to like, you're just cherry picking. You're just trying to find like a convenient point of departure to start your historical explanation. And Chomsky says like 5 times, and Buckley never acknowledges. Like, okay, great, man. You pick. Where are we going to start? Tell me.
Yeah, but every time we begin to go down a road, new subject. Like it's Buckley who keeps like moving the subject. Like, well, why do you give that? Like, well, let's talk about that exception. Like, never, there's no Chomsky never gets like through 3 intact sentences in that segment. It really is rushing in to prevent any point being made. So again, I think we're learning a lot of great techniques tonight. Control the debate, cut your partner off. I don't know what other fun tricks we're going to see in this. Maybe Buckley will like put his face on a wanted poster and go, "You're a wanted criminal." Maybe that's like the next technique is like fraud and photo doctoring. But I'm learning how to debate. I'm going to be a lot better, I think, after this.
Yeah, in a platform you completely control that you can get people on to do those things. I guess that'll work to a certain extent. Although I still don't think Buckley looks very good in that last segment.
Yeah, like the fact is, it does. There's a limit to how much you can do cute tricks. I'll drop my cute little joke here, and yeah, like it's people do have it's the thing about debate. Like you can be cute and fill with shit, and you can get away with it. Like you often come off sounding like unserious or you're like desperate, like you don't have a real. If you're constantly deflecting or interrupting, people do start noticing, and they may not know like all the sophisticated rhetorical terms, but they may go like, "This guy can't finish a fucking question." Like it does. People do start to notice this stuff. You're definitely right.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why you're doing that. And it's, like a little bit is okay, right? Like a little bit could just look forceful, but I think the amount that Buckley's doing it looks pretty bad, especially because he's never responded to Chomsky's invitation for him to tell him when he wants to start the historical record.
Yeah. You don't want to pick a place. Again, that means committing to a position. Like that's smart. You want to avoid committing to positions as much as you can.
Yeah. Michael Strauss, thank you so much for the super chat, brother. Says, "Hi Ben, this is a pointless aside, but if you had a chance to read the hit piece against Hitchens,
yes.
Yeah,
I want to hear about this also. Thank you, Michael.
That spurred from your book and Counterpunch. Also love Buckley's gay pride tie. So what Michael's referred to is day before yesterday, I think, in Counterpunch, there was a article by Andrew Stewart that I'm sort of, I guess it's not a review of my new book because he didn't read it, but it's sort of a objection to its existence. I guess that's the best way to describe it. That he's just upset that there is such a book, not knowing what its contents are, which I found kind of funny because, like, the book is less than a month away from release. He must know, I would assume he knows this, that it would be super easy to get a review copy. I mean, he just would have had to ask. And I've certainly given reviewers the PDF or asked Zero Books to send them a physical copy in the mail. That's happened several times already. And he didn't do that. And it was a really weird article because it was like, I don't know, he just seemed to be mad that I was writing about this subject, although it was also pretty clear that he didn't have like all he really knew about the subject, I guess, was that I guess I find the subject of Hitchens more interesting than he does, right? It's like that seems like a weird thing to object to. It's like, all right, man. I mean, if you're not interested, then the book is not for you, right? I mean, this is
I wouldn't read this. 0 stars. I personally have no interest. Like this review is not that illuminating.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like there are. I could randomly, click around on Amazon or go through the shelves of Barnes & Noble and find tons of shit I'm not interested in. I'm just not going to read it. I'm not going to publish articles in Counterpunch saying that I'm not interested because it's sort of pointless. And it's a weird article in many ways, right? Because like he starts out like a lot of it's like Chomsky, a lot of it's like Hitchens is bad, right? And it's like, okay, I mean, clearly, I think that at least a certain phase of Hitchens' career was bad. I mean, that's right in the title of the book, how he went wrong. So that much is common ground. I probably do find more to like in other parts of his career, and even I think he had moments of lucidity, in the bad period too. But I guess part of what he seemed to be doing in the review or whatever we're going to call it in Counterpunch was saying like, well, there's just no interesting question to be asked about how he went wrong. And it's like, okay, why is that? Right. I mean, like that, but like, because either you just like don't find the man interesting, in which case, again, whatever, like, lots of other stuff you could read. You could read my previous 2 books, but barely anything about Christopher Hitchens in there. But like, if you do find him at all interesting, which this guy certainly seems to, I mean, he wrote this whole article about him, and he, it's funny actually. In the article, he recommends Richard Seymour's book about Hitchens from 2013, I think, for Verso, Unhitched: The Trial of Christopher Hitchens, which is funny to me in 2 ways. One of them is that Seymour himself, a few weeks ago on his Substack, like said that he was like really interested to see that my book was coming out, and he really wanted to see what I had to say. And he said that he's glad that there's renewed interest in Hitchens for the left. He had this funny phrase in there about how he'll be interested to see what the Burgisian salvaging operation can unearth. And he actually said of his own book in that Substack piece, and it's been several years, right? He's got some distance on it. that it was written in a very prosecutorial way. And he kind of says, like, don't get him wrong. He's not backing away from his main charges, but he thinks in retrospect, he wishes he hadn't written it in quite such a prosecutorial way. He says that that it was his book was a labor of love-hate, and it would have been better for it to be more overt in its anguished ambivalence, right? That was the line from his Substack. So that's the first thing that's funny about it to me, that Seymour doesn't share, Stewart's feelings about this. But then the second funny thing about this to me is that Jandrew World, like when I posted this, he made two funny comments. Like one was to, justly complain that he could have at least said the cover's gorgeous, even if he hated everything else about the idea of the book. But then the other one is that Andy actually dug up this dude's Amazon review of the book that he now says is excellent and all there is to say. And he didn't seem to like it so much back then. So I don't know, maybe it's grown on him. But like, it's also weird because it's like, okay, if you're interested enough that like back in 2013, you were writing an Amazon review of Seymour's book, you read Seymour's book, you wrote this whole article about it, about why nobody else should write a book about Hitchens, that like you've clearly got some interest in the subject. And given that, I would think like, it seems like what he's saying is, well, nobody needs to like try to think any harder about why it is that Hitchens went bad at the end because it's just obvious. It's like, all right, is it obvious? And it seems like he's offering a few explanations in the article, all of which, by the way, are things that I address in the book and talk about why I don't find them convincing. There is a reason, I've got to say, why it is traditional to read books before you review them. But like one of his explanations is something or other about Shackmanism, although it's very unclear what he thinks Hitchens' connection into that is. It just seems to be almost like free association, like Hitchens reminds him of that. One of them is that there are cases where he says that, Hitchens was like lifting passages from other people without crediting them, which is, certainly a stain on his character, not nearly as big a stain as supporting the Iraq War. But I don't really know what has to do with whether he's an interesting figure or not, somebody who's worth writing about. And then like his other explanation just seems to be that like, I mean, this sounds like a caricature, but like read the article. This is what he says. Like he seems to be saying that like Hitchens like adopted neocon foreign policy views in the last years of his life because he drank too much. And I've got to say, I don't see the cause and effect relationship there.
Yeah, everyone knows lots of leftists drink too much. Like that's not a secret. You may or may not believe this audience, but many leftists drink too much. It's a secret,
It's what I've heard. It's what I've heard.
Don't let this secret get out. It's an important secret for you to keep.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's, I mean, it's just funny. It just seems to me, it's like, I don't know, man. I'm pretty sure a lot of people who were involved in the Bolshevik Revolution really enjoyed vodka. I'm very skeptical that like there's some amount of booze that you can intake that just sort of like makes you reverse your foreign policy positions. I think there's a more complicated and interesting story going on there, which, I think has to do with the war in Bosnia in the 90s, the conclusions that he drew from that. I think it has to do with the faltering of his confidence in socialism over the course of the 90s. Book's not out for a few more weeks. You could read by Nathan Robinson interviewed me about all this like a couple months ago. You could read that in Current Affairs. But like, I don't know. It's interesting to me. If it's not interesting to you, that's actually also a very good point. To 7104. It's not like Hitchens only started drinking that much in the late 90s. I'm pretty sure, if anything, young anti-imperialist Hitchens probably had a better tolerance than like Hitchens in his late 50s. If I had to guess. At War with Dust suggests maybe Hitchens became a neocon because he didn't drink enough. So I will drink to that. Last thing I want to say actually before we restart the debate and watch the last chunk. All right, Jacob doesn't drink at all. He will never support any imperialist wars in the future. So that's safe. I don't know. Again, like I just feel like if you know anything about not to indulge in too many cultural cliches here, although some of them do have a germ of truth. But like, if you know anything about the Russian Revolution, if you know anything about, the the history of like miners' unions, if you know anything about the Irish liberation struggle, I think you'll find people who actually had real alcohol problems, who still had good politics somehow, just despite that. But in any case, all love to everybody in categories I've just described. And yes, I know that plenty of important Irish Republicans were teetotalers. But last thing I would say before we get back to the last and watch the last part of the debate, Buckley made just an astonishingly bad argument at the beginning of this segment, like bad enough that I think we really do need to go back to it and just talk about it for a minute, which is that he said that, he challenged Chomsky to explain the schizophrenia about his positions on the Marshall Plan and the Truman Doctrine, Truman Plan, whatever the phrase is. Says, how is it that the same government at the same time, popular support, was doing something that you think is bad on Monday and doing something you think is good on Tuesday, or other way around, whichever it was. It's like, really? Because I would think that everybody thinks that happens sometimes, right? Like, presumably William F. Buckley, I mean, to give him a little bit of credit here, that, despite what Gore Fidel said, he's not actually a Nazi.
Yeah, you should love the Russians fought the Nazis, so you must love Stalin then, right? I mean, he's Mr. Fight the Nazis. Come on.
Yeah,
How
exactly.
can you hate farm collectivization on Monday and yet support Operation Mars on Tuesday, Mr. Buckley?
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, Baki, that is I would love to do a debate breakdown of that if Hitchens and Chomsky had ever actually done one, like in person. They only ever did like in the pages of the Nation, as far as I know. But yes, I would love to do one about that. Let's see. Jareed Dasein, thank you for the super chat. Well, Current Affairs itself is back. It's publishing stuff again. Whether other people who parted ways from it might start another publication, I have no particular insight into, but the original magazine is back and going, and I'm happy about that. I think that as much as my I've like had like 1.5 articles in Current Affairs, one co-written, one full one, so obviously, and Jacobin. I always, the joke that's not entirely a joke I always make is like, I'm so happy to be associated with it that like, if I get hit by a truck tomorrow, I want that on my tombstone, his, loving son, husband, was on the masthead at Jacobin. But like, I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it would be healthy to only have one socialist, like national level publication in the United States. I don't think that's enough. It's like a left media ecosystem.
Yeah, we want richness. In the ecology as much as we can. But yeah, Current Affairs is continuing. Obviously, a large number of incredibly talented people who are very closely associated with everything about the magazine and project ended up leaving after some disastrous events in August. Many of us who are still with the original affairs are really pulling for all those contributors, editors, and administrators at the magazine to do a successor project, preferably a magazine, of course, at some point, because there will be, as I've said before, and as on my Twitter and so on, like it's a fairly devastating, destructive loss that we went through there. Everyone who left had plenty of cause. I will just say that. But I'm, kind of at the point where I feel like, we're all reading the same mind-meltingly terrifying headlines every day. To me, it's like a desperate thing to build up left-wing media and left-wing audiences, even if they have, even if after years of doing well, they go through some kind of gigantic disaster that does a lasting blemish on them. But like I love The Intercept, and they, rather. I don't know if they'll ever be able to move beyond the stain of the Reality Winner debacle, which played into the hands of the security state and against whistleblowers. Like,
It
But
did.
I'm glad they didn't shut it down afterwards. I enjoy The Intercept. We really need it. Like, it's some of these things. I don't know. Yeah, this sounds important, but it's like I feel like some of these projects are too important for us to let them fall down if we can possibly avoid it. Maybe.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I do have a take on the current affairs drama for a few months back, but I'm not going to give it on main. Like if you want that shit, well, I talked about it on a thing for patrons once, but I'm certainly not going to do it here. So you can find that if you try hard enough, but I'm not gonna do a whole thing about it right now. That's I think that like I think gossip and drama about left media organizations is among many. I mean, whatever else, I just find the whole thing vaguely depressing. So, in any case, the point I wanted to make, I'm not going to, I still like current affairs. I still want it to exist. I'm certainly wouldn't assert that nobody made any mistakes there, but in any case, I think that, what I was going to say about William F. Buckley, to go back to that, we did Hitchens and Counterpunch and current affairs, and we can go back to Buckley now. Is that I think it was like the last episode with Kale on in the post game for patrons. I gave all my hot takes. I've expended them. So Buckley, when he's saying, well, how can you explain the schizophrenia that you think that the Truman administration was doing a good thing on Monday and a bad thing on Tuesday, as if that's like an inconceivable situation? Well, let's just go one president back. That I would assume that unless Buckley is going to, concede, Vanal's charge that, he's a crypto Nazi, Buckley is continually bringing up the memory of World War II here. So at least at this point, right, he thinks, the Allied victory there was good. Well, okay, what about the Roosevelt administration? I mean, surely Buckley is very against the New Deal, and he's very in favor of the Roosevelt administration pushing, for the United States to, do Lend-Lease and, and get involved in the struggle against Hitler. So is that schizophrenia from his perspective, that it's implementing economic policies that he doesn't like, but also defeating Hitler?
Yeah, like it's such a, on the face of it, absurd thing to complain about. Like, how dare you have different views about different policies by a government? Like, that's so bizarre. I mean, every godforsaken regime has like something positive about it somewhere. I mean, it's such a strange thing. I don't know. When I hear that, it just makes, it's very Cold War. It's very like, well, if you're going to support this side, surely you're going to say it has no flaws. If you like this, how can you, like, it's a very comic book thing. Like, oh, you must hate them. Well, then how can you say a nice thing about them? Yeah, because it's actual, like, fucking factual reality. I don't know. That's how that lands on my ear. Maybe that's where that comes from. That kind of like, well, whose flag are you stupidly waving? Come on, you have to pick one.
No, absolutely. I mean, like, and it's ridiculous, right? Like, yeah, everybody, I could, if I really wanted to, I mean, I'm not particularly interested in tuning this particular horn, but I mean, I could come up with like one or two things the Trump administration did, that I think, that I think were good, although usually when he did a good thing, he did it for like 2 weeks, and then like somebody else whispered in his ear, he reversed it again. But there were mood swings where, like, during the highs, he actually did some good stuff. I like the peace negotiations with North Korea and all that, right? Like we could probably come up with half a dozen things. Doesn't mean that I don't think Trump was like massively more bad than good, or that's not really good that he's out of office. Like, this is just, I mean, if you're just not like a weird child about this stuff, then like you should not have any problem seeing that sometimes bad governments also do good things.
Seems simple enough. We make it look easy. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's go back to the debate.
Mr. Greenfield.
Mr. Chomsky, you state in one of the essays in your book, the unpleasant fact is that if one wishes to pursue the Munich analogy, there is only one plausible candidate for the role of Hitler, and by that you mean the United States. There are other references to Nazi Germany's conduct of foreign policy and our own. And you also less emphatically suggest that a lot of the internal policies of the United States government have left millions of its own citizens hungry or exploited. If this is the fact, that is to say, if the nature of our society is functionally indistinguishable in this respect from Nazi Germany, then doesn't that legitimate any tactic that one wishes to use in opposition?
Well, I certainly don't believe that your assumption. That is, I don't believe, and I don't think I ever say that our society is functionally indistinguishable from Nazi Germany.
No, that's
what I say is that
I want to
if
zero
one
in.
wants to
I want to
pursue,
zero in.
so
If
I
by
would
blowing
disagree
up
with the
a
assumption.
troop train, we prevent 5,000 American soldiers from going to Vietnam to participate in what you do explicitly
Yes.
call a criminal war,
Right.
isn't that a moral act?
Oh, I think that, yes, it would be. If sabotage would, in fact, contribute to ending the war, I would be in favor of sabotage.
So-
and let me give you some concrete
So that's
examples.
a tactical decision, not a
tactical
moral.
decision. In fact, I'll give you some examples. What the Berrigans have done, for example, at Catonsville and Milwaukee, I think is very heroic and, in fact, saintly.
But that is not killing American soldiers.
Oh, no, I'm not. Well, you were talking about sabotage.
You're talking about blowing up a
American
troop train. I
Oh,
would
no,
assume there'll be
I'm
loss
sorry,
of life.
I'm sorry. I thought you meant, let's say, stop preventing a train from going.
No, I mean
I'd be-
blowing up. I mean
blow up
sabotage,
the track, but not the
assassination.
people.
What all
Right,
the
you
heroes
see,
in America.
I would first of all make a sharp distinction, as for example the Berrigans did, between attacks on property and attacks on people.
That's what I want to know.
Fundamental distinction. But then, you see, if one raises the question about attacks on people, then I think there are very tricky issues. See, I can concede, I would have been against assassinating Hitler, for example, because I'm against murder. But if I believed that assassination of Hitler would have really contributed to the end of to ending
Right.
the war, I think one could have given an argument. Now, if it were
Mutatis
true,
mutandis Lyndon Johnson.
and that would pertain to Lyndon Johnson. But in neither case, incidentally, do I think that it
Yeah,
tactically would have. And
Ms. Hockman.
I would like to ask Mr. Buckley what he thinks the motives of the people who are in favor of the war in Vietnam are. Putting it very simply, how can we possibly hope to help universal misery when we are so miserable here?
Well, I think we're less miserable here. I mean, you may not be a happy young lady, but I'm sure you're not as miserable as you would be if, for instance, you didn't have a free press, if you weren't able to write such poetry as you wanted to write, if you couldn't join a labor union, if you couldn't express yourself as you liked, if the mayor of your town might be disemboweled tomorrow. I think that there are observable differences
Aren't you in favor?
between what freedom you have here, or put it this way, between your misery and theirs.
if
I
you wouldn't
prefer
be,
your misery.
if you wouldn't have saturation bombing take
Well,
place
I
in your
I
village,
just
for
I want to
example.
disagree with you for the moment, because I think that there is a certain condition, a human condition, the condition of guilt, which Mr. Chomsky speaks about, and which for me is the most interesting point of his argument. The guilt that we feel here, which in a way may keep people from writing poetry or from writing anything that they think, because they're absolutely stifled
They
by the
manage to write their
climate of guilt.
complaints and get on the best out of this.
Excuse me?
They manage to write their complaints.
But I know of
And get on
many
the best
people
out
who
of
are
this.
not writing now because of the war in Vietnam, who are not functioning because of their guilt.
Well, it's not an aspect of my responsibility for foreign policy to encourage you to externalize your complaints. But if you want to, there are any number of book publishers, magazine publishers, and radio stations, television stations who are glad to hear them out, which I think is qualitatively different from what exists, for instance, in North Vietnam.
Or South.
Or Greece,
Well,
or Greece,
not
for
quite so
example, or
much.
Brazil,
A
or
little-
dozens
yeah.
of other countries.
A little bit less so, sure.
Less so?
I think it's true.
No,
And
it's not
it's-
true. in
Then
fact.
publishing
Now, wait a
is
minute,
the
I'll tell you
only
what's
motive.
true. What's true is that a nation at war does not have the same amount of liberties as a nation at peace. Abraham Lincoln suspended the right to habeas corpus,
Yeah.
and the oldest parliament in the history of the world didn't have an election for 11 years during
Yes,
their
but if
war.
you compare the state of freedom in North and South Vietnam prior to the war, as some people have done, like Joseph Buttinger, I'm afraid it doesn't come out the way you like.
Well, I think it does come out the way.
Not by the evidence that's been
Ask the
presented.
refugees or number the refugees who left North Vietnam and compare them with those who left South Vietnam.
That's a very different issue. What I was talking about is the right of free expression in North and South Vietnam. I mean, take a look, for example, at Buttinger's analysis, where he runs through cases. Quite apart from that, take a look at, for example, again, pick your authority. I mean, let it be Bernard Fall, let it be almost anyone you like. See, there's a great amount of village democracy which was instituted in North Vietnam, and in fact has also been instituted in the Anti-dominated areas of South Vietnam, which is something qualitatively different than anything that has existed in Asian societies before. And this exists simultaneously with, let me be quite clear, this exists simultaneously with a good deal of repression and certainly not civil liberties of the sort that we're used to.
Chomsky, one of the most libertarian constitutions in the history of the world was written by the Soviet Union.
I'm not talking about constitutions. I'm talking
my
about
point
facts.
is, what kind of freedom is experienced by somebody in North Vietnam? The answer is that the freedom is perpetually insecure.
Oh, well, you don't know
for
that.
reasons.
You see,
I
what
know
you
that
have
Ho Chi Minh himself has wept over the occasional
just-
necessity to kill 40, 50,000 of his own.
Not the
countrymen.
necessity, the occasional fact. But just one moment, though. What I was talking, very not only sarcastic but also wrong. And you see, it's very important to recognize, if you want to understand what communism means in Southeast Asia, to realize that along with many authoritarian and repressive practices, which I certainly don't condone, there is on the side a great deal of democratization. There's been a liberation of energies and involvement.
Utter nonsense, if I may say so.
I don't think you're right.
After all, the great paradigm of Red China, in which the AFL-CIO itself concedes to something in the neighborhood of 20 million victims on that particular. I'm talking according to them. Or
But
perhaps I didn't ask you whether that was
The
correct.
AFL-CIO
But they did have a commission out there.
No one has claimed the million people killed through Chinese communist purges. Absolutely no one.
Well,
no one serious, at least.
It was published in the New Leader.
Fine.
Which
Well, the New Leader, yes,
serious,
of course, the New Leader might. I mean, but I'm talking about
CIA plant.
Well, I said no one serious has. Take a look at the China Journal.
Well,
take a look at China Quarterly.
I consider this.
But you see, I think you're missing the point, really, and I think it's an important point. See, I think in looking at China, one has to recognize a great deal of repressive practice, a great deal of authoritarianism, and one also has to recognize a great deal of spontaneous democratic structure of a sort which never existed in Asia before, and if you want to know the truth, to some extent doesn't even exist in our society. Now, these things exist side by side.
If you read A Day in the Life of Ivan
side.
Denisovich, you find out that there's an extraordinary democratic structure even inside concentration camps. But it
No,
seems to me that it's almost profane to make this observation.
I think it's profane to make that analogy, because I'm talking about true democracy in which,
don't think so.
look, in which people, the peasants who live in a village control the institutions of their lives. They control the
If you want to get out, you bump into the Berlin Wall on either side of the.
There's no Berlin Wall in China.
There's the equivalent of a Berlin Wall. There's the sea, and there's starvation.
No, there's no. That's just the point. You see, starvation has been very largely overcome in China.
Yeah, because they have something like 94% of people working on agriculture. But I think Mr. Doxey has a question for you.
They also haven't had 2 bumper crops in the last 2 years.
Professor Chomsky, when you say, as you said about 30 minutes ago, that there's a relativity of truth between nations, would you classify
relativity of truth? I don't know.
Relativity of truth, you said, in the international scene.
I don't understand the comment. If I said it, I don't know what it means.
Well, would you call yourself a political? Would you call yourself a political relativist?
I don't understand the concept.
Well, put it this way: do you believe in a natural law, in transcendental truth? Let's say a fixing social unit.
I think that there's something to the doctrine of natural law, but I think that that's much more abstract than anything we've been discussing here.
Well, but wouldn't that then justify the use of terror in, let's say, stopping a tenet of the natural law from being broken, or stopping, let's say, the ends from...
Let's bring it down to earth. I see, I'm, of course, opposed to terror. Any rational person is. But I think that if we're serious about the question of terror, serious about the question of violence, we have to recognize that that it is a tactical and hence moral matter. Incidentally, tactical issues are basically moral issues. They have to do with human consequences. And if we're interested in, let's say, diminishing the amount of violence in the world, it's at least arguable, and perhaps even sometimes true, that a terroristic act does diminish the amount of violence in the world. Hence, a person who is opposed to violence will not be opposed to that terroristic act.
Walt Russell says exactly the same thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now,
And he happens to be wrong in the case in which he applies it.
No,
You see, these principles tell you very little about real
no,
cases.
but that's I must say, that's the one thing that bothers me more about what you've been saying than the way you write.
Mm.
That kind of language, that is the notion of a terroristic act which restricts consequent violence is precisely what Rostow says in The View from the Seventh Floor, when after this whole analysis about the moral world, he says there's not a single place where we don't have major military might to support it.
I think that the real point here is that when you try to formulate general principles that will apply to arbitrary political affairs, you find that you can only make very vacuous and empty statements. See, if one wants to talk in perfect abstraction from any real situation about the justification for violence and terror, then you come up with platitudes and empty remarks and so on. The point is that, there are no very general principles that apply to such circumstances, or if there are, no one has enunciated and formulated them. So what one really has to do is look at the concrete historical situation. Now, where I would disagree, maybe Rostow and I would agree at this level of abstraction on the use of violence to prevent greater violence. Where we would disagree is in our evaluation of what is happening in this concrete historical situation.
So therefore,
and that's where one's attention ought to.
So therefore, you have no philosophical objection to the way in which Mr. Rostow states his case, merely to its applicability in existing circumstances.
No, I say at this level, I might not. I don't know what he says
but
about
he wouldn't
that.
Other things.
But in other things, I have very great difference. For example, Walt Rostow says that we should try to strengthen that the great threat of China to us is that it will succeed and provide a model to other countries. And we have to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Is that why you kept him out of MIT?
I assure you that I had nothing to do with keeping him out of MIT. I'd be delighted to have him back. He's a great help to us when he's around.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chomsky. Thank you all.
Stirring.
Yeah, just letting that play out because I was just enjoying that like 60s ass outro music.
A very classic show design, yeah.
Yeah, it's like you could, oh man, just something listening to that. I mean, that just has this great like sort of old-timey cheesy television show ending, credit music feel. Like it's like that's like yeah, that's like I mean, not that it actually sounds like the end music from Gunsmoke, but like, something that people would be watching, before or after that.
It really looks like a set from the original Flying Circus Python show. Like it really looks like Graham Chapman's about to step in and hit Buckley with a hammer, and then cut to old ladies applauding, and that's great. I have a lot of affection for that era of design, so I like that aspect of this debate very much. The rest of it was a disaster, but good design.
I think I think Chomsky did a good job. I mean, I think I will say I think young Chomsky probably did take I think he probably did romanticize like certain aspects of North Vietnamese and society, Chinese, society. Like I think he sort of course corrected on that, later in his life. I mean, to be fair, if we're grading him on a curve for like the New Left in 1969, it's like he's not doing that very much at all, But I think like compared to the truth, like I think he's probably, I would not claim to be an expert at all, right? But I just to lay down my marker, I strongly suspect that the village democracy stuff is really overstated. But that said, it could be true to some extent on a very low level, right? But like, like wartime, like grassroots democracy support, like that's kind of like too much you can ever hope for from any, no matter how righteous some army is. It's never like organizing civilian co-ops behind it. It's whatever fucked up hierarchy that military force represents. And I don't know. I mean, it's a guerrilla war. How many books have I read about Vietnam? Close to zero. So. Like I said, I don't claim to know. I will just register my suspicion on that point. I also think that that like some of the stuff about China, to be fair to Chomsky, I think some of this information didn't come out until much later. When like I think some of this stuff wasn't really I mean, it was to a certain extent, but I mean, I think it became a matter of public record much more like in like the Deng Xiaoping era
Yeah.
about some of what happened in China in like the 50s, especially. You know, but I was always think of the you know, back in 2018, I actually spent 3 weeks teaching at like a summer class at Jilin University in like extreme northern China, like almost up at the border with North Korea. They did this like international education weeks thing, and you know, I managed to go through the like global office at Rutgers. And it was great. I had a blast, you know, but there was a point where there was like this like really old Rutgers prof who was there, who was like kind of interrogating, you know, some of the Chinese students about like what they were taught about some of these purges and stuff that had happened. And you know, I'm not saying there's no truth to this, because obviously I know in some cases they absolutely did do things like this, but I know it was just kind of funny that like one of the Chinese students I remember was like, "Oh no, I don't think they were really killing those people. I think they just, you know, they just sent them out to live in the countryside." And yes, again, I know sometimes as a punishment they did send people out to do agricultural labor. I think there was more killing this kid was, you know, was maybe no one knew about, right? But like, all I can think is, man, it sounds like a lie they tell you about like the family dog, you know, that like,
Yeah.
like no, you know, he's still alive. He just went out to live in a nice house.
Yes,
You
we
know,
sent,
nice house in the
your, we
country.
sent your dissident movement out to the big farm in the countryside. That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, whatever. I think that would be my one criticism of Chomsky in this debate. And also, I'm not sure why he, you know, for the sake, for just for the record, the official GTAA position is pro killing Hitler. You know, I watched Inglourious Bastards. That sounds good to me. You know, the end of the movie. But yeah. Other, you know, those are my two criticisms. You know, it's a little too soft on you know, some of those claims about Vietnam and China that, you know, that I think he probably definitely would question later in his career, and I think he was a little too quick to be like, oh yeah, killing Hitler definitely wouldn't have done any good. I actually think it might have, but other than that, I think Chomsky was fantastic in this debate.
Yeah, you know, I basically agree. I mean, the man's a rock, and you know, here you're going up against, you know, Cold War America's civil mythology on a conservative show, and he's got the, you know, but you know, you obviously are there at this right wing patricians, you know, you're there at their pleasure. So like, you know, you know, but then he's speaking up from off camera while he's talking to some sweet 60s kid who's asking questions. And he was trying to throw in like, well, don't forget we fucked up Guatemala. And oh God, it's so brutal. I mean, the foreign policy arguments, you know, we've been having all through the post-war period, you're seeing here. But at least this is on, you know, American national TV at a time when no other American was hearing any treatment of that kind of reality. So fighting a tough, thankless corner there where you're not going to get a big breakthrough, but maybe you can make a contribution. So I feel like you got to look at this and just be like, you know, maybe he plugged through this in a thankless sort of conditions slanted against you environment.
Exactly. Also, I did laugh. Somebody in the chat was saying that the kid who was asking him the question about relativism and natural law at the end was sort of proto Charlie Kirk, because that was in that Charlie Kirk discussion. He said some kind of similar things. It was a really weird, confused question, but it was like you know, it was a recognizable type, right? I mean, it was the sort of like, you know, young conservative with intellectual pretensions kind of question where he's like mixing up like 3 different issues, but like he sounds really sure about himself.
Yeah. Do you think the Leviathan should shrug? Like, no, that's not. Those are unrelated works. Oh no.
Yeah, no, exactly. You don't know, like, whether you're like a relativist and whether you think natural law theory is whatever, doesn't matter. I mean, I think Chomsky did a great job. I mean, I think that like the fact that he was really like, you know, I mean, whatever. I mean, he did the Chomsky thing, you know, he was really calm and methodical and, you know, undaunted. I think that was probably a good look. for doing this, right? I mean, I think a lot of people making the same case would have gotten really angry, and very understandably, but I don't think it would have been as effective a presentation. And I like the fact that Chomsky kept bringing it back to Greece, and like Buckley's just like weird refusal to grant that like military dictatorships that are backed by the United States are just as dictatorial, as ones that aren't.
Those people still get to shop. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, God, it's just so dogged. I did enjoy one thing toward the end. It's nice when the students ask or the audience or whatever ask questions. So he got to speak without interruption. Like he was able to say 5 sentences in a row and really make a point there. That's when it really took off. But it's good. Yeah, not Chomsky himself, not a lot of pointers. I feel like he's got I feel like this young kid has a bright future in front of him debating people. He could grow old doing this. Oh, fuck. He did. That proves it.
Yeah. No, I'll bet he'd still be pretty cogent in his 90s. Yeah. No, this was a lot of fun. I like this. I mean, like I said, Buckley's evil, but he's also more entertaining to watch than like any of the people. I mean, think about like the people who like are sort of, we were talking about the British accent thing earlier, right? That was like Milo Yiannopoulos' thing, that like he had that like private school British accent that Americans are impressed by. Yeah. And like think about Milo Yiannopoulos and think about William F. Buckley, right? Like it's just so much more fun to watch Buckley doing this, and especially when he's going out up against somebody like like Noam Chomsky. That's
yeah. How are we supposed to feel like we can be heroes if our villains are like schlubby idiots with shows whose producers give them 3 note cards? Like Buckley, I mean, piece of garbage, but like at least he's a formidable opponent. Like these guys, the only barrier they have is that their showrunners keep real dissidents away. Like their ability to control their own shows is their only hope. When you're in a room with them, it's just mass destruction. It's terrible.
Yeah. I mean, Buckley, I mean, again, it's not a moral thing, but just in terms of being an interesting person to talk to, Buckley does give you the sense that he's like read books and thought about them, which is a bar that like a lot of the guys we're talking about could not clear. Yeah. Like some of these people barely read Wikipedia articles.
Omicron, it's gibberish.
Exactly.
It's gibberish. Exactly. Alpha, beta, what is it? I never heard that, so I'm smarter than those people. It's like, it really is. It's like when you're like a really drunk or dumb person is like calling you stupid, and you're just like, wow, you're peeing yourself, and you're like, you're dumb. Like it's that feeling you get with like, wow, what happened here? Like, what a decline.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That was the very first. That was the very first debate that we watched when we were doing the. There were like 25 Sunday night debate breakdowns before we moved it to Thursday, and the very first one was Buckley versus Baldwin, which was a weird one because, of course, it was about race at the height of the civil rights movement. And so Buckley had to be real slippery about exactly what his position was. Like there was this there was this amazing moment in that debate where like, he was kind of like in a weird way, like decades ahead of his time. He was like trying out all the like shitty conservative lines about race, and and he was like, it was all taking place at the Oxford Union, and he says, oh, well, just this is a, bad situation. And, it's not that he doesn't, feel for the plight of the Negroes or whatever, but, but at a certain point, what are you supposed to do? And one of the Oxford students says, well, like heckles him. And he's like, well, you could let them vote in Mississippi. And Buckley is like very quick on his feet. Slimy response to that is, hey, if it were up to me, a lot of the white people in Mississippi, wouldn't be allowed to vote either.
Yes, yes, that's right. Like, well, in fairness, I'm opposed to having all of you filthy commoners have any of your dirty policy.
Exactly.
So it's like, oh, like before you get mad that we don't let black people vote, I'd like for none of you to vote, and only men who own land can vote again, like it originally was in this godforsaken land. Yeah, great. We're supposed to be impressed by that, you slimy inbred aristocrat. Jesus Christ, like it's. People like that. It's like, oh no, but I'm just kind of an elitist. Like, oh, that's right. We should shoot you out of a cannon. Then I forgot about that.
Yeah, exactly. That doesn't actually make it. Doesn't make it better. If anything, makes it slightly worse. But yeah.
Yeah. It's like I ducked being racist by declaring myself an enemy of all humanity. So.
Exactly. So we are going to be off next Thursday. I'm going to be on a plane when we would normally be doing this, but in 2 weeks, I am going to be back with Dylan Burns is going to be joining me to break down a Hitchens debate from the 90s about the death penalty. This is actually kind of an amazing artifact that like this exists. It is Christopher Hitchens and his debate partner, Jesse Jackson, like debating these two ghouls from the National Review with Ed Koch, like Mayor Ed Koch, moderated. So it's the weirdest thing, but yeah, it's
watch that.
I don't know how this came to be, but yeah, it's Hitchens is always like very eloquent, in his opposition to the death penalty. Yeah. Yep, that's the one. Yeah, there's going to I will just tease this. GTAA patrons already know what I'm talking about, but the rest of the world will find out, in the coming day or two, probably. There is a major new expansion of the GTAA media empire that is going to be discussed on the show on Monday, which is going to be that show also has good stuff coming up in it. We are so the guest on the show is going to be David Pizarro from Very Bad Wizards, and I think we might finally do the Ben Shapiro talking about Kant for the philosophy segment. That'd be fun, but we'll see. So good stuff. If you are a patron, check your email to find out what I'm talking about. And anything you want to plug before we go, Rob?
Yeah, Current Affairs is back in action. We have a ton of incredibly fun stuff coming from artist and writer contributors. I'm finishing up. I'm supposed to have finished up already an article for the issue. It's almost done. Nathan might be watching this, so I have to say that. It's going to be a very, very strong issue. We're hoping that folks can see there's an enormous amount of really, really valuable left material to make that discerning audience around Current Affairs happy. Folks should check it out. It's got a lot that's worth supporting. I do have a next book in the works, but it's nowhere near done, so folks can check out my existing cool books, Bit Tyrants. You can know everything about big tech, and so don't let them push you around anymore with their terms of service. And Capitalism versus Freedom, the Total Road to Serfdom, from the Once and Future Zero books, which we should gossip about when we're done, man. I don't know if you have the opportunity, but we should.
Yeah. We can do a bit on Zero.
We should grouse.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, it occurs to me, by the way, I think this occurred to me earlier today that I forgot. I was thinking about episodes we could do in January, maybe sometime, and it hit me today. You should come on. We should do a Tuttle Twins episode sometime.
Oh God. You sure? Of course. I accepted the responsibility of being the left-wing person who reads the Tuttle Twins. I took it upon myself. It's Nathan's fault. He made me do that. But I'm very proud of that review. Folks can take a look at that. Current Affairs Tuttle Twins review. Libertarian children's books. And it's exactly what you're picturing. And I would say my review is the funniest, meanest thing I ever wrote. So I would love to chop up, libertarian young adult fic, which is a little bit bigger than the Tuttle Twins. I'm sad to say. We should totally chop that up. Totally.
Nice. Let's absolutely do that. All right. Thanks, Rob. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Should be an episode for patrons on Saturday with Conrad Hamilton. So yeah, good stuff coming up. Thank you, everybody. Left is best.